Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I had always liked the quiet of the woods, the way the trees swallowed up the noise from the world. I didn't want to camp in one of those official campgrounds with kids screaming and people playing loud music. I wanted to be alone. So I picked a spot deep in a national forest, one that didn't have a name on any map I could find, just a spot I had marked from Google Earth after weeks of staring at satellite images and comparing them with hiking forums. I parked my car at the end of a dirt road, loaded my backpack with food, a small tent, water, a compass, and a printed map I had folded and laminated. I had done this kind of thing before, just never this far from everything. I felt sure of myself. The trail wasn't even a real trail, more like a narrow path made by deer or hikers long ago. I walked for about 5 hours into the forest, deeper and deeper, watching the trees get taller and the sun sink a little lower every hour. I passed a creek, then a fallen log covered in moss, and finally came to a small clearing surrounded by pines. It felt right. It felt safe. I set up camp there. The first night was peaceful. I built a small fire with dry sticks and boiled some water for my freeze-dried meal. I sat in the dirt and ate while listening to the wind push through the trees. I remember thinking this was exactly what I wanted, just me in the woods and nothing else. I slept fine. No weird sounds, no animals bothering me. The next morning, I decided to explore. I left my tent and some of my gear at the campsite, just brought water, the map, a compass, and some food in a small day pack. I marked the location of the camp on a map, not just mentally, but with a real dot from a pen. I also took a picture of the camp with my phone before I shut it off to save the battery. I hiked northeast, following the sun and keeping the compass steady. I walked through thick woods, climbed over boulders, and followed the sound of another creek. It was harder to move through the forest than I expected. The underbrush was dense in some places. I wasn't following a trail anymore. I just wanted to reach a ridge I had seen on the map, a high point that would let me look out over the trees. It took hours. I made it to the top sometime in the early afternoon. The view was incredible, miles and miles of green. I could see nothing man-made. No roads, no houses, just forest in every direction. I sat there for a while, ate a protein bar, drank some water, and checked the sun's position. Then I turned around to go back. I figured if I followed the compass exactly back southwest, I would hit the creek, then the log, then my camp. But after a few hours of walking, I realized something was wrong. The trees all looked the same. I didn't see the creek. I didn't see the log. I didn't see anything familiar. At first, I stayed calm. I told myself maybe I drifted off the path a little, maybe I had taken a slightly wrong angle. I adjusted, turning more west, but after another hour I was still lost. I looked at my map and realized how little it helped out here. It had no details of what I was seeing. It just had general elevations and rivers, but nothing matched exactly. My compass was fine. I was following it, but the forest was disorienting. The ground went up and down more than I expected. It twisted me around without me noticing. I told myself not to panic. I still had daylight. I still had food and water. I still had energy. I turned my phone back on, but there was no signal. I tried walking in a big arc, tried to circle back to where I thought my camp might be. That just made it worse. Every tree started to look like the last. The sun began to sink. I had to accept it. I wasn't going to find the campsite before dark. I needed to stop walking. I found a flat patch of ground, laid out my emergency blanket, and sat down. I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing sounds in the dark, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. I had no fire, just a headlamp. I kept it off most of the time to save battery. My water was low. My legs were sore. I felt stupid, angry at myself. I had prepared so well, and still I was lost. The next morning, I tried again. I picked a new direction and started walking slowly, carefully. I checked the compass every few minutes, trying to keep a straight line. But after another few hours, I saw nothing familiar. I hadn't seen another person in days. The weight of the trees, the silence, it started to press on me. I shouted a few times just to hear my own voice. Nothing answered. The sky was gray that day, and I couldn't even use the sun to help guide me. I knew I had maybe one more day of walking in me before I'd have to stop and wait for rescue. I started rationing my food more. I filtered creek water with a small straw filter I had in my day pack. I stopped walking by mid-afternoon and built a small shelter out of branches and bark just to feel like I was doing something useful. That night it rained, and I shivered under my jacket, listening to the steady tapping of water on the leaves above me. The third day, I climbed a small hill and tried to get a signal again. Nothing, but I saw something, a faint line through the trees, like an old trail or an animal path. I decided to follow it. It wasn't marked, and it twisted around, but it felt different from the rest of the forest. I walked that path for hours. My legs were weak, my feet blistered, but I kept going. Eventually, I saw something that made me stop. A fire ring, stones arranged in a circle, black with ash. Not mine, someone else's, maybe a hunter's or another camper's. But it meant people came through here. I kept walking. Another hour passed, and I saw it, a trail marker, a real one, nailed to a tree, faded but still visible. I followed it, an actual trail. It led me downhill, winding through denser woods. My legs were giving out, but I pushed forward, and then through the trees I saw it. The dirt road. My car, right there, just 20 feet away. I stood there for a long time, not moving, just breathing. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands were shaking. I walked slowly to the car, unlocked it, and sat inside. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there and stared out the windshield at the trees. I had only been lost for 3 days, but it felt like weeks. I thought I was prepared. I had maps, tools, knowledge. But the forest didn't care. It didn't help. It didn't give me anything back. It just watched. I drove to the nearest ranger station and told them everything. Gave them the rough coordinates of my abandoned campsite. They thanked me and said they'd send someone out eventually. I didn't care. I just wanted to be out. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still love the woods, still love nature, but I don't trust it like I used to. That feeling of being truly lost, of walking in circles with no way to know if you're even getting closer to safety, that's something I won't forget. It's not like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no sudden rescue. Just long hours, empty woods, and your own mind asking the same question over and over. Which way is out? A few weeks ago, I went on a trip and rented an Airbnb townhouse in a small town I'd never been to before. I chose it mostly because it was close to some hiking trails I'd been wanting to try out. I didn't know anything about the town or the exact area I'd be staying in. I just knew it was supposed to be quiet, not too far from the trails, and in a decent location for me to take a short break from work. I was looking forward to some time outdoors, alone, just hiking during the day and relaxing in the evenings. The drive took around 9 hours. It was long and tiring. By the time I finally reached the town and found the Airbnb, it was already getting dark. The sun had gone down and the sky was that deep blue-gray just before full night. The neighborhood was made up of connected townhouses, all lined up in a neat row with small driveways and porches. The place I was staying in didn't stand out. It looked just like the rest, not new, not too old either. A little worn down, maybe. The siding looked a little faded, and the porch light was on, but flickering slightly. Still, it wasn't anything that bothered me. I parked on the street in front of the place and grabbed my bags. I didn't see a keypad or any kind of code lock on the door, and I didn't remember getting one of my messages, so I texted the host to let him know I'd arrived. While I waited, I stood there looking around the street. It was quiet. A few porch lights were on here and there. No one was walking around, and no other cars were pulling in or out. A couple minutes later, I heard a door open somewhere nearby, and a man came around the corner of the unit next to mine. He smiled, said he was the host, and walked over with a casual sort of confidence. He didn't seem weird, but something about the way he came around that corner like he was already waiting made me feel a little on edge. Still, he unlocked the door, handed me the key, and said he'd be right next door if I needed anything. Then he left, and I didn't hear him again that night. The inside of the townhouse was clean, though basic. The floors creaked a little, especially in the hallway. The walls had that look of being recently repainted to hide older stains. The furniture looked like it had been bought secondhand, but was still functional. I dropped my bags in the bedroom at the far end of the hallway and looked around. The windows had blinds that didn't quite close all the way, and the place had a bit of a musty smell, like it hadn't been aired out properly in a while. I figured that was normal for a rental that wasn't used too often. I went to bed early that night. I was worn out from the drive and wanted to start hiking early in the morning. The bedroom was quiet. The bed was comfortable enough, though I wasn't used to sleeping on the ground floor. Where I live, my bedroom's always been upstairs, so hearing every little sound outside the window and just being on the same level as the front door made me feel more exposed than usual. But I was tired, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next morning, I ate a quick breakfast, packed a bag, and drove out to one of the trails I had mapped out. The hike was great, about 4 hours long, with beautiful views and only a few other people on the trail. It felt peaceful being out there, away from everything. I got back to the townhouse a little after 7 p.m. The sun was starting to go down, and the streetlights had started turning on one by one as I pulled in. But the moment I walked back inside, something felt off. I couldn't point to anything right away, but it felt like the air in the townhouse had changed, like someone had been there. I went into the bedroom and stood in the doorway for a long time. The suitcase I'd left on the floor was zipped when I'd left, and now it was open. Nothing was missing that I could tell. My clothes were all still there. My wallet was in the drawer where I'd left it. But the edges of the bed were rumpled, like someone had sat down on it. I made it before leaving. The blinds were slightly shifted open more than I'd left them. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I was sure I'd closed it before leaving. I walked through the whole townhouse, looking for any signs that someone had been inside. I checked the windows, the front door, even the small back patio door, but everything was locked. There were no signs of forced entry. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe I'd left the suitcase open and forgotten. Maybe I hadn't closed the bathroom door all the way. I heated up a frozen meal, ate on the couch, and watched YouTube on my phone, try to ignore that nagging feeling. At 11 p.m., I went to bed. The hallway leading from the living room to the bedroom felt longer than usual that night. Every creak in the floor felt louder, more deliberate. Once I was in bed, I turned off the bedside lamp and tried to sleep, but I couldn't relax. I kept falling asleep for a few minutes, only to wake up again. The silence in the house wasn't helping. No traffic, no neighbors, just the occasional pop of the wooden walls settling or the hum of the refrigerator from down the hall. Maybe an hour after laying there, still mostly awake, I heard it, very soft, deliberate. A door creaking open. It wasn't my bedroom door, and it wasn't the bathroom door. It sounded like it came from the front area of the house. I held my breath, listening as hard as I could. There were no footsteps, just that slow, careful creak like someone was trying not to be heard. I sat up slowly and looked toward my bedroom door. Everything was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light leaking in under the front door. Then I saw it. That glow had changed, like the front door was open. Just a crack, but enough for the porch light to spill indifferently. I stared at it for a long time, frozen. I finally got up quietly and crept to my door, cracking it open just enough to look down the hallway. The front door was open, not wide, but just barely swinging like someone hadn't shut it all the way. I pulled my door closed and locked it, then backed up to the far corner of the bedroom. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried to speak quietly, explaining that someone might be in the house. Midway through the call, I heard something outside the bedroom door. A single floorboard creaked, then nothing. But when I looked at the gap under the door, I saw it, the shadow of 2 feet standing there, not moving, just standing, waiting. I stopped talking completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the operator's voice. I stayed silent for at least another minute, just staring at that shadow. Then just like that, it was gone. I didn't hear footsteps retreating, no door opening or closing. The shadow just vanished. I stayed locked in that room until the officer knocked on the door. When I finally came out, the front door was wide open. The place was quiet again. The officer looked around with me. Nothing was broken, nothing stolen. But there were signs, smudged footprints on the floor, too large to be mine. A few scuff marks on the bedroom door frame, like someone had leaned against it. The police didn't find anyone. I told them I thought it might have been the host, but they had no evidence to say that for sure. He wasn't home when they checked next door, and nothing linked him directly to what happened. There were no cameras in or outside the house. The scariest part was realizing whoever it was didn't want to steal anything. They came in while I was there. They waited until I was in bed. It wasn't about the house, it was about me. The thought of that night still sticks with me. That someone could walk in, move my things, stand outside my bedroom door, and leave without making a sound. I left the next morning. I didn't bother finishing the trip. I haven't used Airbnb since. And sometimes when I'm home, lying in bed, I still stare at the bottom of the door, half expecting to see those feet again. In November of 2021, I was traveling from Philly to Las Vegas for a jiu-jitsu tournament. I've been training and competing for years, and by then I had already traveled all over the country. Normally, when I went to these tournaments, I stayed with teammates. It helped save money, and honestly, it was just more comfortable to be around familiar people. But this time, things didn't line up. Most of the team I usually linked up with were staying at a different place that was full, or not coming at all. I ended up having to book my own place. I didn't think much of it. Airbnb had worked fine for me before. I was in a bit of a rush when I made the booking. I picked a spot near the Strip, mainly because I figured I'd be close to the venue, food, and other stuff I might need. I didn't take much time looking at the neighborhood. The pictures looked okay. The price was decent. I just needed somewhere to crash between weigh-ins, matches, and training. But when I got there, I realized the area was kind of rough. Not totally abandoned or anything, but definitely run down. A lot of bars on windows, empty lots, graffiti. There were a few decent-looking houses, but overall it had that feeling where you keep checking your mirrors when you park. I considered canceling the reservation and finding something else, but I told myself I was overreacting. I rationalized that I wouldn't be there much anyway. Just sleeping, showering, maybe warming up some food. Everything else I'd be out and about. I reminded myself that I'd stayed in worse places during other trips. Still, something felt off, but I ignored it. When I arrived, there was no host to greet me. That didn't bother me too much. I've done self-check-ins before. The Airbnb profile photo had been of a flower, so I had no idea what the host even looked like. They'd messaged me earlier with a key code and simple instructions. The place was a small studio that shared a wall with the host's main house. It was its own separate unit with just one entrance. One single door, no back door, no emergency exit. That kind of layout always makes me slightly uneasy, but again, I brushed it off. The key code to the door struck me as weird. It was literally just 1, 2, 3 for 5, 6, 7. I remember stopping for a second, thinking, who the hell sets that as a lock code? But then I looked at the Wi-Fi info and saw the password was just password. So I figured maybe the host was just old or not great with tech stuff. I glanced at the reviews again. They were decent. A couple of 4 stars, some 5s. No red flags about safety. So I shrugged it off and dropped my bag. Inside, the place was clean enough. Basic setup, bed, nightstand, microwave, small table, and a bathroom. No signs of anything shady. The drapes were heavy and thick, good at keeping light out. The window next to the bed looked directly into the side yard between the studio and the host's house. It was dark out there. No street lights, just the occasional glare of passing car headlights catching the metal of a chain-link fence in the yard. I closed the drapes tight. After a long flight and some time at the gym earlier that day, I was exhausted. I lay down and started scrolling on my phone. Around 9:30 p.m., just as I was starting to doze off, I heard a tapping sound. It came from the window right next to the bed. Not loud, but sharp. I froze for a second, trying to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The blinds were closed, so I couldn't see who it was. I sat up and said, just a reflex, hoping maybe it was a mistake and someone would go away. Nothing happened for about a minute or two. Just silence. Then, the tapping came back, same as before. I said hello, louder this time. Again, silence. I felt uneasy. It wasn't windy, so it wasn't tree branches or anything brushing the window. The tapping was too deliberate. I texted the host immediately, asking if it was them outside the window. An hour passed before they finally responded. They wrote, Asterisk. I was going to bring you some water, but it seemed like you were asleep, so I left. Asterisk, I didn't even know how to process that. Who brings water to a guest and taps on their window instead of knocking on the door? It didn't make sense. By now it was close to 11. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, trying to decide if I should leave or maybe go for a walk just to reset. I thought about taking a shower to clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to stay alert. Something was off, and the last thing I wanted was to be vulnerable with water running and music playing or something. I ended up just staying still, fully clothed, sitting upright on the bed in the dark with only the TV on low. Around midnight, I heard faint noise outside again. This time it wasn't tapping. It was footsteps, slow, almost careful ones, on gravel or dirt. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of buttons being pressed on a keypad. Someone was outside, trying the key code on the front door. I stopped breathing for a second, straining to listen. Whoever it was entered the wrong code at first. I could hear the tiny beep, 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 followed by a dull thud when it didn't work. Then a pause, then more beeps. The second time, the code worked. I heard the latch click and the deadbolt disengage. I was up in a flash. I ran to the door just as it was starting to open inward. I slammed it shut hard, using my full weight to push it closed. My heart was pounding. I leaned against the door with both arms braced. From the other side, a man's voice said, "This is my room." His voice was low, steady, not frantic or surprised. Just cold. That name, Midel, was the name of the host. I said nothing back. Just locked the door, flipped the deadbolt, and called the cops. I spoke loud enough so whoever was on the other side knew I was doing it. I gave the dispatcher the address and told them someone had just tried to enter my unit using the code. I said I believed it was a setup. I don't know what stopped them from pushing harder to get in. Maybe hearing me say I was on the phone with police made them back off. I stood there, still blocking the door with my shoulder, until I saw the flashing lights outside. When the cops arrived, they weren't even surprised. They seemed like they'd heard similar stories before. They asked me a few questions, then walked around the outside of the house, talked to the host. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught pieces. The host's story kept changing. First that was me trying to check on the guest. Then it was maybe my cousin was confused and thought it was their room. Then later something about a maintenance check. None of it made sense. The officers told me they'd stay nearby while I packed and waited for an Uber. They didn't advise I stay the night. I agreed. I stuffed everything into my bag in 5 minutes. The host never came out to talk to me directly. I only caught a glimpse of them through a curtain in their house as I left. When the Uber showed up, I jumped in and didn't look back. As we pulled away, I felt a wave of relief. But I couldn't stop thinking about how everything lined up. The tapping started around 9:30 p.m. in Vegas. That would have been 12:30 a.m. my time, after a full day of travel. The break-in attempt came around 3 a.m. East Coast time, when I should have been deeply asleep. If I had let my guard down and actually fallen asleep, I might not have woken up in time. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but maybe not. To this day, I never saw the person who tried to come in. I don't know if it was the host, someone they knew, or a stranger who got the code, but it felt planned. Too many things lined up. The lazy key code, the excuse about bringing water, the delay in replying, the host's changing story. It all felt like a setup. I didn't report it to Airbnb. I should have, but at the time I just wanted to move on. I stayed at a hotel for the rest of the trip. My tournament went fine, but my head wasn't fully in it. I was distracted. I kept checking locks, listening for footsteps. That trip left a mark. I still compete, and I still travel, but I'm a lot more careful now. I research neighborhoods. I only book entire places with solid locks. And if anything feels off, I leave. I don't ignore my gut anymore. I don't know why I picked that place. I think I just wanted something quiet, away from everything. I had some money saved up, and I was burned out from work. I typed remote cabin rentals into a website and clicked on one that didn't even have many reviews. It was a basic wooden cabin out in the middle of nowhere in Oregon. A few pictures showed trees, a gravel driveway, and a dark wood porch. I barely looked at the description. I just booked it for 3 weeks and told myself I was going to unplug, read some books, and hike. When I got there, it was colder than I expected. It was late September, and the trees around the area were mostly pine. The road leading to the cabin was long, narrow, and not paved. I had to slow down several times just to avoid potholes. The deeper I drove into the woods, the more I realized how isolated the place really was. No phone service, no nearby cabins, not even any signs of life. It looked like no one had been there in a long time. The gravel driveway had weeds poking through, and the wooden steps leading to the porch were cracked and warped. There was a key under a loose stone, just like the email said. Inside, it smelled like old wood and something faintly sour, like dampness that had settled over the years. The furniture was simple. A small couch, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and an old cast iron stove. There was one bedroom and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been cleaned properly in a while. The windows were smeared with dust and streaks of rain. I wasn't expecting luxury, so I didn't complain. I lit a fire in the stove, unpacked some canned food and bottled water, and sat down to read. The first 2 days were peaceful. I went for hikes, cooked simple meals, and read. At night, I'd sit by the fire with a flashlight and a book until I felt tired. I started to notice little things. The floorboards creaked more than they should have, especially near the front door. I figured it was just old wood settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the air in the place felt off. Not haunted, not supernatural, just wrong. Like when you walk into a room right after someone's been arguing in it. By the 4th day, I started waking up in the middle of the night. I never fully heard anything, but it felt like something had pulled me out of sleep. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart beating fast, as if I'd had a nightmare I couldn't remember. I'd lie there in the dark, listening. Sometimes the wind picked up and knocked branches against the roof, or maybe a squirrel ran across the porch. But once at around 3:30 a.m., I was sure I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps on gravel. Then nothing. I stayed frozen in bed until the sun came up. That day, I walked around the cabin. I looked for prints in the dirt or anything out of place. There was nothing. I told myself I imagined it, maybe even dreamed it. I tried to enjoy the rest of the day, but I kept glancing at the edge of the trees like someone might step out at any moment. I started locking the door, even during the day, which I hadn't been doing before. On the 6th day, I found something strange. I was hiking a little trail that started near the back of the cabin and looped around toward the creek. The trail was narrow and mostly overgrown. As I walked, I spotted something off to the side, a plastic bag hanging from a low branch. Inside it was an old t-shirt, rolled up tight. I took it down and opened it. The shirt had dark stains on it, almost black. It smelled like mildew and something sharper underneath, like rust. I dropped it and wiped my hands on my pants. There were no other signs around. No bottles, no trash, no signs of a campsite. Just that bag. I left the trail and went back to the cabin. I couldn't shake the image of the shirt. That night, I barely slept. The air felt heavier, and the woods outside were too quiet. No owls, no wind, no movement. Just stillness. I sat in the dark for hours, clutching the heavy flashlight like it was a weapon. On the 7th morning, I found something else. This time it was under the porch, stuck between 2 loose boards. A boot print, fresh. The dirt was still loose around the edges, like it had been made recently. I compared it to my own boots. The tread was different. I stared at it for a long time, then walked back inside and locked the door. That day, I debated leaving. I'd still have to drive a few hours just to find a gas station or a phone signal, but I was starting to feel watched. Every time I stepped outside, I had this crawling sensation between my shoulder blades, like something unseen was just beyond the trees. That night, everything changed. I went to bed early, hoping I could sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. I left the flashlight next to me like always. I must have drifted off, but I woke up again at 2:12 a.m., and I know the exact time because I looked at my watch. The room was completely still. I lay there for a few minutes, not moving. Then I heard the front door creak. Not slam, not open fast, just a slow creak, like it had been eased open gently. My blood turned cold. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. I didn't hear footsteps inside, not yet, just silence. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and stepped into the hall. I kept the flashlight low. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I crept to the main room and peeked around the corner. The front door was open, only a few inches, but I was sure I had locked it. I moved fast then. I shut the door and bolted it. Then I turned on every light I could find and sat in the middle of the room with my back against the wall. I stayed like that until the sun came up. When light finally filtered through the trees, I grabbed my bags, tossed them into the car, and drove. I didn't even check out. I didn't leave a note. I just drove until I saw the first town sign. I pulled into a gas station, sat there for almost an hour, and didn't speak to anyone. When I finally got my phone signal back, I called my brother and told him I was coming to stay for a few days. I never found out who was out there. I never saw a face, never heard a voice. But I know someone came near that cabin. I know someone stepped onto the porch in the middle of the night and tried the door. I still think about the shirt in the bag and the boot print. I think someone lives out there in the woods, someone who watches, someone who waits. Maybe for people like me, people who want to be alone, people no one would come looking for right away. I never went back. I never reported it because nothing technically happened. But that cabin is still listed online. I checked once. The photos haven't changed. But now I noticed something I didn't before. In one of the pictures, the one of the back trail, there's a shape in the trees. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it. But it's there. Just a dark outline, a little too tall, standing too still. Looking, watching. I don't tell people about it anymore. They always want to believe there was a ghost or some storybook ending. But the truth is, someone was out there. Someone real. And the scariest part is knowing how close I came to being a story someone else tells. About the guy who went out into the woods and never came back. I had planned the hike for months. The Grand Staircase Escalante area had always been on my list, especially the canyons. Dry, massive, layered with colors that shifted as the sun moved. Most of the place feels untouched, quiet in a way that makes you feel like you're walking through the past. I wanted solitude. I wanted quiet. I didn't realize what that kind of quiet really meant until I was deep in it. I started early on a Monday morning. The trailhead was empty, as expected. I signed in at the small box near the parking area, just my name and the date. No cell service. I wasn't worried. I had 5 gallons of water split between 2 bottles and a bladder, enough dehydrated meals to last a week, a satellite beacon, a map, and a compass. I knew how to use all of it. I wasn't new to solo hikes, and I had done longer ones before. But the Grand Staircase felt different, more isolated, less touched by people. That was the point. The first day was hot, dry heat that saps your energy without you even realizing it. I followed awash most of the morning, then climbed over a low ridge to a narrow canyon. Shade was rare. I stopped every hour to rest, sip water, and check my bearings. The red rocks burned against the blue sky, and silence pressed in from all sides. No planes overhead, no rustle of cars, just my boots, my breath, and the occasional bird. I set up camp the first night near a dry creek bed. I found a small overhang to block some of the wind and staked my tent into the hard ground. I boiled water for a meal, ate quickly, and lay back on my sleeping pad, watching the stars stretch overhead. The sky looked impossibly big, and without light pollution, it was like looking at a painting. I didn't sleep deeply, but I wasn't anxious, just alert. That's how it usually goes when I'm alone in the wilderness. The second day was much like the first. Long, steady walking. I saw lizards darting across the rock, a couple of jackrabbits, and maybe a distant coyote, though I only caught a glimpse. Still no people. That didn't strike me as strange. Most folks don't hike this far out unless they know what they're doing. I followed the plan I had laid out, 3 days in, then 2 back out. I knew where I'd camp each night, where the dry washes were, and where I'd have the best chance to find shade. That second night, I pitched my tent at the base of a rock wall. It was a good spot, flat, shielded from wind, not too close to any cliffs or loose rock. I made another dehydrated meal, drank a full bottle of water, and tried to settle in. My muscles were sore, but nothing serious. Just that deep kind of tired you get after being on your feet all day. I zipped into my sleeping bag around 9, left the rain fly open to let the breeze in. The stars were out again. I watched them until I drifted off. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I woke up, not sure why at first. I lay still, heart beating slow and steady, listening. The wind had picked up slightly, moving through the canyons with a low hum. But something was different. There was a sound, soft but clear, whistling. At first, I thought maybe the wind was squeezing through some narrow crack nearby. That could make strange sounds, but this was rhythmic. A tune, not quite a song I could place, but it had a pattern. Then, between the whistles, I heard something else. Footsteps, soft, slow, like someone walking carefully on sand and gravel, not wanting to be heard. The sound moved around my tent. Whistle, step, whistle, step. I lay frozen. My sleeping bag was up to my chin, and I didn't move a muscle. I didn't even breathe deeply. I didn't bring a gun, just bear spray. And even that was zipped in a side pouch of my pack. I couldn't get to it without making noise. The whistling continued for what felt like forever. Sometimes it faded, like whoever was making it had walked away. Then it would come back, louder, closer. Once it was right outside my tent. I could hear breathing, not an animal. It was too steady, too human. I stared at the roof of the tent, my heart pounding now. Sweat pooled up my neck. I didn't know what to do. Should I yell? Make noise? Turn on my headlamp? Or stay still? I stayed still. Eventually, the sound drifted away. It didn't rush off, didn't panic. Just faded, like someone walking slowly, deliberately into the desert. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there, eyes wide, until the first light broke over the canyon wall. I waited another hour before unzipping the tent and stepping out. I walked a slow circle around my campsite. Footprints, human, bare feet, big ones, spaced like someone walking slowly. They circled the tent twice, then veered off toward the wash. I packed up fast. No breakfast, no coffee. I shoved everything into my pack and started walking. I wasn't even thinking clearly, just moving. I didn't check the map for a new route or consider my food supply. I just walked. By midday, I had covered more miles than I planned. My legs ached, and the sun was brutal. I found a shady spot near a dry wash and dropped my pack to rest. I sat down, catching my breath, trying to drink slowly even though my mouth felt like sandpaper. Then I saw it, a mirror, sticking halfway out of the sand. Old, square, maybe 8 inches wide. The glass was cracked, the edges chipped. I stared at it for a long moment before I picked it up. Underneath, in the dirt, someone had written something with their finger. "You look tired." I dropped the mirror, just let it fall and backed away. I didn't stop again that day. I didn't eat, didn't drink much. I just walked. I followed the sun, checking my compass occasionally, staying on course. My legs cramped. My mouth was dry, but I didn't care. I had to get out. That night, I didn't set up camp. I didn't stop. The moon was nearly full, and it cast enough light for me to see the trail. I walked through the night, stumbling sometimes, brushing against cacti and sharp stone. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like someone waiting. I saw the ranger station at 4 in the morning. Just a small outpost, 3 miles from the trailhead. The lights were off, but I didn't care. I sat down on the porch and waited for morning. I never looked back toward the canyon. When it got light, I walked the rest of the way to my car, got in, and drove straight to the nearest town without stopping. I didn't even take off my boots. I just kept going. I told someone later, a ranger, about what happened. About the footprints, the whistling, the mirror. He just nodded. Said I wasn't the first to mention something like that out there. I've done a lot of solo hikes since then. Colorado, Montana, even Alaska. But I never went back to Grand Staircase. I never will. Some places are quiet for a reason. It was a little after 11 p.m. when I left the diner. I had been driving all day and only stopped for a quick meal and to stretch my legs. The place was almost empty, just a couple truckers in the back and an older waitress who looked like she wanted to go home hours ago. I paid in cash and stepped back out into the night. The parking lot was lit with those dull orange lights that barely reached the edge of the pavement. My car was parked just beyond the last light, sitting quiet in the dark, surrounded by empty road and open land. I was somewhere in Arizona or maybe New Mexico. I'd been driving across states without paying much attention. I got back in the car, rolled the window halfway down because the air was still warm, and turned the engine over. It rumbled to life, low and steady, and I pulled out onto the highway again. There was barely any traffic, just a few trucks passing by now and then, their headlights like brief flashes of life before fading away again into the black. I had a full tank of gas and figured I'd drive another hour or so before finding a rest stop to sleep for the night. The road stretched out ahead, long and flat. No curves, no turns, just a straight line cutting through the dark. The landscape on both sides was nothing but desert and scrub brush. No houses, no billboards, no signs. Just road and land. My headlights were the only light for miles. The radio didn't pick up anything, so I left it off. Just the sound of the tires rolling over the pavement and the hum of the engine. About 40 minutes in, I noticed something on the shoulder up ahead. Looked like a car with its hazard lights blinking. The flashes were weak, almost like the battery was dying. As I got closer, I saw it was an old gray sedan sitting just a few feet off the road. Hood up, driver's door open, no one inside. I slowed down a bit as I passed, just enough to glance over. The interior light was on, showing an empty seat. There wasn't anyone standing near it or walking down the road. I figured someone must have gone to find help or maybe got picked up by a passing car. I kept driving, but 10 minutes later, I saw another one. Same type of car, gray sedan. This one was farther off the road, maybe 20 feet into the dirt. The front was tilted a little, like it had gone into a shallow ditch. Headlights off, but the driver's door was open again. No one inside, no lights, just sitting there in the dark. I passed it slower this time, trying to see if maybe someone was crouched nearby, but there was nothing. Just the dry, flat land and the faint shapes of distant hills. I started to get this tight feeling in my stomach. Something about it didn't sit right. Two abandoned cars, same color, same make, both with open doors. No people, no signs of life, just dead quiet and empty desert. I looked at my phone, but there was no signal, no bars. I was too far from anything. I told myself to keep going. Maybe someone was dumping old cars. Maybe it was nothing. But my eyes stayed sharp on the side of the road now. Every mile I scanned the shoulders and the land around me, waiting to see something else. Another 10 minutes went by. Then I saw a shape on the road ahead. This time it wasn't a car. Looked like someone lying down right on the edge of the lane. I slowed down fast, my headlights catching the shape clearly as I got closer. It was a man, face down, arms out, not moving. He was wearing jeans and a light shirt, one shoe missing. Just lying there, like he had dropped suddenly. I stopped the car about 15 feet away and left the engine running. I didn't get out. I just stared. There was no movement, no rise and fall of breath, no twitch. I honked once, short and sharp. Nothing. Just the echo across the desert. Then I backed the car up slowly, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. Something felt wrong. The hair on my arms was standing up. I didn't even think. I just put the car in drive and passed around him, sticking close to the left side of the lane. I drove faster now, not speeding like crazy, but just enough to feel like I was putting distance between me and all that weirdness. I watched the rearview mirror a lot, expecting to see headlights behind me, or maybe a figure standing in the road. But there was nothing, just the empty dark stretching out behind me. I kept going for another 20 miles. No more cars, no more bodies. Then I saw lights up ahead, a gas station. It was like an old one from the 60s or 70s. One pump, a small store with dusty windows. The sign was flickering. I pulled in and stopped under the light. The place looked empty. There was an old car parked to the side, but no sign of anyone. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, hands gripping the wheel, breathing slow. Then I got out and walked up to the door. Locked. I looked inside, saw shelves with a few dusty items. A cooler that looked long dead. No movement. I didn't bother knocking. I just used the bathroom on the side of the building and got back in the car. As I was about to start the engine again, I saw it. In the mirror, the man who had been lying in the road. He was standing across the street, not moving, not walking. Just standing, far enough that I couldn't see his face clearly, but close enough that I knew it was him. Same clothes, same stance, same stillness. He was facing my car. I don't know how he got there. I don't know why he was standing there, but I knew I didn't want to be anywhere near him. I turned the engine over and hit the gas hard. The tires kicked up dust as I shot out of the lot and back onto the road. I didn't look back again, just drove. Fast. Focus on the white lines, the road ahead, the sound of the engine. I didn't stop until I saw a highway sign for a bigger town about 40 miles north. I took the exit and followed the road into the lights. Found a cheap motel, one of those with a neon vacancy sign buzzing like a bug zapper. I parked right outside the room and went in without even checking the bathroom or the sheets. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and sat on the edge of the bed with the TV on low even though I wasn't watching it. I stayed there until morning. Didn't sleep much. Just kept thinking about the cars, the body, the man standing under the dark sky. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But I knew what I saw, and I knew how it felt. The next day, I told the local police what I saw. They listened, asked some questions, but they didn't seem too concerned. Said it was probably a breakdown and some drunk guy wandering around. I didn't argue. I just nodded and thanked them. I never found out who that man was, or why those cars were out there, or how he ended up standing on the other side of the road hours later. But I know this. He wasn't looking for help. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. Since then, I don't drive at night anymore. Not on empty roads. Not in the middle of nowhere. I stick to cities, to places with lights and people and noise. And if I ever see a car on the shoulder with its door open, I don't slow down. I just keep going. I don't usually tell people this kind of stuff. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know how to explain what it feels like. What it does to you. How it stays inside you like a second skin. Stuck so close it's hard to breathe sometimes. I guess I've lived most of my life scared of my own mind, not knowing when it might break again. It all started the summer I graduated high school. One morning, just like any other, I woke up and everything felt off. There was this weird stillness in the house. Not quiet like peaceful Sunday mornings, but quiet like something was wrong. I walked out of my room, and the second I turned the corner into the hallway, I knew. I didn't see anything yet. I didn't hear anything either, but I knew. My legs felt heavy like I was walking through wet sand. My throat was tight, and my chest felt like something was pressing on it. I stepped into the living room and saw my dad lying there on the floor. At first I thought maybe he was asleep, or maybe he fell and hit his head. My heart was racing, but I dropped down next to him and tried CPR. I pushed on his chest, kept pushing, counting out loud like I'd seen people do in the movies. His lips were slightly blue and his eyes half open. I screamed for someone to help, but no one was around. I lived in a small house with just my dad and me. He was already gone. I don't remember how long I sat there, crying and pressing on his chest. When the paramedics came, they asked me questions, but I barely understood the words. My ears were ringing, and I just kept staring at the same spot on the carpet next to where his head had been. After that day, I stopped being a person. I was just this hollow shell going through the motions. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Or if I did, I'd wake up screaming. The nightmares were always the same. I'd be walking toward the living room, and somewhere in the hallway, I'd remember what was about to happen, and I'd start screaming before I even saw him. Then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. This happened night after night for a year. I got to a point where I stayed awake for 2 or 3 days at a time. I drank coffee until my stomach hurt and stared at the ceiling in my bedroom, too afraid to close my eyes. Eventually my body gave out. I had a breakdown in the middle of the day. I don't remember the exact moment it started. One second I was sitting with my girlfriend, and the next I was gone from the world. My muscles tensed up and locked, like I was having a seizure. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, later told me I screamed like an animal for nearly an hour. I didn't even hear it. In my mind, I was back in the hallway again. Over and over, I walked toward the living room. Each time, right before I crossed the threshold, I screamed and turned away. But I couldn't escape it. I had to keep living it. Again and again, I got closer and screamed and turned away. Finally, I walked into the living room in the vision. I let myself see him. I saw my dad's body just like it was that morning. And then it stopped. Everything just stopped. The loop ended. I came out of it slowly, like coming up from deep underwater. When I finally blinked and looked around, I was soaked in sweat. I could feel my muscles aching. But I didn't have the nightmare again after that. That peace didn't last forever. Fast forward to 2005. I joined the Army and found myself in Iraq. It was a different kind of fear there. Not the creeping dread of nightmares, but sharp, immediate, and constant. I led convoys through dangerous stretches of road where any kid holding a phone could be the trigger for an IED. We got intel that terrorists were using children as bait. They'd send them out in front of convoys to make us stop, and then they'd ambush from the sides. We were told to keep driving, no matter what. If someone got in your way, you ran them over. It went against everything inside me, but war doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about survival. One day, we were on a long route outside of a small village. I was behind the wheel, focused, sweat dripping into my eyes. Then I saw him, a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, standing in the middle of the road about 300 meters ahead, waving his arms. My foot hovered over the pedal. I didn't know what to do. Time slowed down and my heart sank into my stomach. My truck chief screamed at me to floor it. I hesitated for a second, just one heartbeat of hesitation, then slammed my foot down. We raced forward, and at the last second, the kid jumped out of the way. I didn't hit him. I kept going, my eyes locked on the road ahead. Later at the FOB, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That moment where I had to decide whether or not to run over a kid. I lay there on a thin cot, staring at the metal ceiling above me, feeling hollow and cold inside. I must have drifted off at some point because I started dreaming. I was driving again. I saw the kid run out, but this time I hit him. The truck jolted and I felt the horrible thud under the wheels. I stopped the vehicle and got out to check. I walked slowly around the back of the truck, dreading what I'd see. But I reminded myself, this is a dream. It's not real. I even thought back to those old nightmares, trying to tell myself I had been through worse. But as I turned the corner and looked under the back of the truck, it wasn't the kid. It was my dad, lying there just like that morning years ago. Pale, still, gone. My stomach dropped. My throat tightened. I felt the scream crawl up my spine and burst out of me. I woke up mid-sprint. My boots slammed against the ground. I had no idea where I was. I was outside the sleeping quarters, running full speed in a direction I didn't recognize. My body had just taken over. I stopped and bent over, breathing hard, the panic still rolling through me in waves. I eventually found my way back. Nobody said much. Stuff like that happened over there more than people like to admit. After that dream, I never had another one like it. Something about seeing both of those moments, two of the worst in my life, meld together like that. It was like my brain finally hit its limit. It didn't have the strength to throw that horror at me anymore. But the fear didn't go away. Not really. I still feel it deep inside me. I still walk into rooms and sometimes catch my breath for no reason. I still look down empty hallways and get that pull in my chest like something terrible's about to happen. I still think about that kid on the road, and I still think about my dad on the floor. The nightmares are gone, but I don't trust my own mind. I don't know if it'll stay quiet. I don't know what might bring it all back. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and just sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My wife tells me I grind my teeth in my sleep. She says I mutter things she can't understand. I don't remember any of it, but I feel tired all the time, like I've run a marathon in my sleep. I don't want pity. That's not why I'm telling this. I just want people to understand that not all horror comes from outside. Sometimes the worst kind lives inside your head. It changes shape, hides in old memories, and waits for the right moment to crawl back up and grab you by the throat. You could survive a lot of things in life. War, death, loss. But the stuff that really sticks to you, the stuff that chews you up slowly over years, most of that happens when no one's looking. Most of that happens when you're alone, in the dark, just trying to sleep. I haven't had those dreams in a long time, but I stay ready because I know what it feels like to lose control. And I know that when it comes back, it won't knock on the door. It'll just be there, waiting. A few years ago, I was home alone at night. It was one of those evenings where everything feels a little too quiet. The house was still, no creaks or wind, just that soft low hum of electronics and the TV playing in the background. I had the living room light on and was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under me, kind of zoned out watching some random show. I wasn't expecting anyone. My phone was on the coffee table in front of me, face down. No texts, no calls. Just me and the quiet. It must have been around 10:30 or maybe closer to 11. The kind of late where it's dark enough outside that the porch light, if turned on, would cast long shadows. I hadn't turned it on though. I rarely did unless I was expecting someone. I lived in a typical one-story house in a normal, quiet neighborhood. Not too far out in the suburbs, not too close to the city. Just average. The kind of place where most people kept to themselves and things didn't usually feel strange. But that night, something did. I was half watching the screen when I heard the doorbell ring. The sound was sharp, loud, way too loud in that stillness. I sat upright fast, almost dropping the remote. When I'm home alone at night and the doorbell rings, I never answer it right away. Actually, I usually don't answer it at all unless I'm sure someone I know is coming. There was no knock, just the bell, once. A single press. I muted the TV and just sat there for a second, listening. Nothing. I got up slowly. I didn't want to walk heavy or make any noise, so I crept toward the door. I didn't turn on the porch light. I never do when I'm unsure about who's out there. I figure if the porch light's off, they can't tell if I'm home or not. I moved quietly to the door and stood to the side where you're not in front of the window or the glass in the door. My house had one of those little peepholes, not the wide-angle kind, just a regular old-school one. I leaned in and looked through. At first, I didn't see anything. It was really dark outside. The porch had a little overhang, so shadows kind of pooled there. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something. There was a figure. It was small, like 3 to maybe 4 feet tall. I couldn't make out a clear shape, just this black blob, like a silhouette or something. It was darker than the rest of the night outside. That was the strange part. It didn't blend in with the dark like shadows usually do. It stood out. There was no light out there, but I could still see it. And it was moving. It wasn't standing still. It was doing this kind of motion, almost like dancing. Not like a human dancing at a club or anything like that. It was dipping its body down, then bringing its arms out in this wide, smooth motion, like wings flapping gently, like it was swaying or performing some weird slow motion gesture. It wasn't fast or jerky. It was calm, smooth, too smooth. Arms, or at least the limbs that looked like arms, moving out and then in over and over. It didn't look playful. It didn't look angry. It was just moving. I don't know how long I stood there, watching. Probably only a few seconds, but it felt longer. My eyes were wide, and my stomach felt like it dropped into my legs. I couldn't make out a face or clothes or anything like that. Just that weird, dark figure doing that motion over and over again. I had this wave of dread roll through me, like something deep in my chest just told me not to open the door, not to move. My heart was beating hard in my ears, and I had to force myself to pull away from the peephole. I didn't want to look anymore. I went back toward the living room, still moving quietly, and sat back down, but I didn't turn the TV on. I didn't even pick up my phone. I just sat there in the dark room with only the dim light behind me from the kitchen. After a few minutes, I got up again. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, maybe, or just wanted to see if it was gone. I tiptoed back to the door and leaned in to look through the peephole again. Gone. There was nothing there now. Just the porch, the empty yard beyond that, and the street out front. No movement, no sounds. It was completely still. I stood there for a long time, just staring, expecting it to step back into view or move from the side. But nothing happened. Eventually, I backed away again and double-checked all the locks, front door, back door, all the windows. Everything was locked. Everything had already been locked, actually, but I still checked just to be sure. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights off, just waiting. The doorbell didn't ring again. No knocks. No more movement outside. But I couldn't shake that feeling, that image of the thing, the way it moved. The next day, I went outside in the daylight to look around. I checked the porch. There were no footprints. Nothing out of place. The mat was where it always was. Nothing was touched. It was like it hadn't been there at all. I thought about checking any security cameras in the neighborhood, but I didn't have one myself, and I wasn't really close to any of the neighbors enough to ask. I figured it'd be awkward trying to explain what I saw without sounding like a crazy person. And even if I did, what would I say? that I saw some kind of dancing shadow thing on my porch. In the days after, I tried to tell myself it was probably a kid messing around. Maybe someone in a costume. Maybe even some kind of prank. But the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. It was too small for an adult, but the movements weren't how a kid moves. They were too smooth, too slow, like it wasn't in a hurry. And why dance like that? Why ring the bell and then stand there doing that weird motion in the dark? Not knocking, not saying anything, just waiting, doing that slow, deliberate movement like it wanted me to see it, but not understand what I was looking at. I still think about it sometimes, especially late at night when things are quiet and I'm alone. Every now and then, when the doorbell rings unexpectedly, I freeze a little before I move. I always check through the peephole first. I always keep the porch light off if I'm unsure. It's been a few years now, and nothing like that has ever happened again. But I've never forgotten it. That shape, that motion, that silence. I don't know what it was. I really don't. But it was real. I know what I saw. I needed a break from everything. The noise, the people, the city. My head had been spinning for months, and I couldn't sleep right. Everything felt too much. So I took some time off work and drove upstate, far from anything. I found this old cabin on a rental site, deep in the woods, about a 5-hour drive from the city. The listing said it was built in the 70s, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, running water only if the pump didn't freeze. I liked that. I didn't want distractions. I wanted to be alone, completely alone. I got there late in the afternoon. The sun was still above the trees, but the shadows stretched long across the dirt road. The cabin looked smaller in person. The roof sagged a bit, and the wood siding had gone gray. A single window faced the front, covered in dust. There was a stack of firewood near the porch, and a rusted axe leaned against the wall. The lock on the door was stiff, but I got it open after a minute. Inside smelled like old pine, maybe a bit of mold, but not bad. It was simple, just a cot, a wood stove, a table, and a single chair. A little kitchen sink, too, and a small cupboard. I felt good about it. This was exactly what I needed. That first night was quiet. I chopped some wood, lit a fire, and cooked a can of beans over the stove. I didn't bring much. Just canned food, a few jugs of water, some batteries, a flashlight, a hatchet, and my old hunting knife. I had a notebook and a few books. I didn't plan to go anywhere, just to sit in silence for a few days, walk a bit in the woods, maybe write something if I felt like it. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders, watching the trees go dark. No cars, no planes overhead, just wind in the branches and the sound of the fire crackling inside. At night it got cold. I heard things moving in the trees, probably deer or squirrels. Every now and then there'd be a crack or thump, but nothing unusual. Woods make noise. It's normal. I kept telling myself that even when the noises seemed a little too heavy, like steps instead of animals. Still, I slept. Not great, but better than in the city. The next morning, I woke up early. Light was just starting to seep in through the window. My breath fogged in the air. I got the fire going again and made some instant coffee with boiled water. I bundled up and walked a little ways into the woods. I didn't go far. I marked trees with a small strip of cloth as I went so I could find my way back. It was beautiful, untouched snow, no footprints, just quiet and still. A few birds chirped, but otherwise it was silent. Peaceful. I stayed out maybe 2 hours, then turned back. I followed the marked trees, but when I got back to the cabin, I noticed something weird. The door was open, just a few inches, but open. I was sure I had closed it. I checked it twice before I left. It doesn't swing open on its own. The door drags a bit, you have to pull it. My first thought was the wind, but there wasn't any. Second thought was an animal, but nothing seemed disturbed. I stepped inside slowly. Everything was where I left it. No scratches, no mess. The fire had gone out, but that was expected. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. I closed the door and locked it, even put a chair under the knob, just to be sure. The rest of the day, I stayed in. Read a little, dozed off, kept the fire going. I tried to forget about the door, told myself it didn't mean anything. But when it got dark again, I started hearing those same heavy sounds in the woods. Not constant, just here and there. A step, then silence, then another, somewhere else. like someone pacing slowly, always staying just out of sight. I stayed up a long time that night, listening. The fire burned low. I kept the flashlight close. Around 3 a.m., it finally stopped. I fell asleep with my knife in my hand. The next morning, I checked outside. No tracks. The snow was mostly undisturbed, except mine from the day before. That made no sense. If it had been deer or any animal, there would be prints. Same for a person. Nothing. But I still felt it. Something was watching. I packed some things in my backpack in case I needed to leave quickly. My keys, wallet, a lighter, water, flashlight, knife. I kept it next to the door. That day I didn't go out. I stayed inside with the fire burning and tried to stay calm. Around noon, I heard movement outside, soft crunching in the snow. I looked out the window, but didn't see anything. I waited, holding my breath. Then a knock. Not loud, just one knock. I froze. It came again, softer. Just 2 slow knocks. I didn't move. My heart was racing. I didn't answer. I waited, staring at the door, barely breathing. Then nothing. Silence. After maybe an hour, I slowly opened the door and peeked out. No one. Still no tracks. That scared me more than anything. I knew then something wasn't right. I wanted to leave, but it would be dark soon. I decided to go at first light. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire going, kept the flashlight on. Every now and then I heard faint sounds outside, but no knocks this time. Just presence, like something was waiting. I stayed on the cot with my back against the wall, staring at the door, knife in hand. At dawn, I grabbed my pack and left. I didn't even stop to eat. I locked the door behind me, like that would help, and started walking down the dirt road. My car was parked about a mile away, near the main logging path. I didn't look back. My eyes scanned the trees the whole time. Nothing moved, but I still felt it, like I was being followed. When I reached my car, I found the back window smashed, not broken in a normal way. The glass was cracked in a perfect ring, like someone had hit it carefully, deliberately. Nothing was stolen. Nothing inside was touched. I didn't waste time. I got in, started the engine, and drove. Fast. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, and even then I didn't feel safe. Back in the city, I try to forget about it. But the thing is, I still don't know what happened. I've told myself it was just nerves, that I imagined some of it. But I didn't imagine the open door. I didn't imagine the knock. I didn't imagine the smashed glass. A few weeks later, I looked up that area online. Not much came up. Just a few old hunting cabins, a defunct logging route, some rumors of people going missing back in the 90s. Nothing concrete. I thought about reporting it, but what would I say? That I got scared? That someone might have been out there watching me? No crime was committed. Nothing taken. No one hurt. At least, not me. But I never went back. And I never will. I still have dreams about it sometimes. Not nightmares exactly. Just that same feeling of being watched. Of something waiting just outside the edge of vision. I keep my doors locked now, even during the day. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike alone. I went there to get away, to find peace. But I came back with a different kind of silence. The kind that sits behind your eyes. The kind that waits. It was late at night when I decided to go for a drive. I couldn't sleep. The air in my apartment felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. I've been feeling like that for a while, restless, tired, but wired. It had been a long week at work, and everything in my life felt like it was on repeat. Same routine, same sounds, same smells. My mind needed to get out, to breathe something different. So I grabbed my keys, threw on a hoodie, and stepped outside. The streets were quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels too still, like something's just under the surface. The only sound was the soft rumble of my tires against the pavement and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Most houses had their lights off. I drove with the windows down, cold air hitting my face, hoping it would snap me out of the weird fog I was in. I didn't really have a destination. I figured I'd just drive until I felt better. Maybe head toward the hills just outside of town. I took the long road that led to the backcountry, a winding two-lane road that passed through dense woods and empty fields. No streetlights out there, just the glow of my headlights cutting through the dark. The road curved a lot, and every now and then, I'd spot a raccoon or a deer on the side. frozen in place before darting off. I was about 20 minutes out when I saw a small side road I didn't recognize. It looked like an old service road, not well kept, just a dirt path barely wide enough for one car. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd follow it a little ways just to see where it went. I wasn't thinking clearly, I just felt like moving. The road was bumpy and uneven, trees pressed in close on both sides, branches scratching at my windows. It felt like I was driving into a tunnel of black. I kept going for about 5 minutes before I saw a clearing up ahead. There was an old shack or maybe a cabin, half hidden by overgrown bushes. The place looked abandoned. The roof sagged in the middle, and the wood siding was gray and cracked. No lights, no signs of life. I don't know why I stopped the car, but I did. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I just wanted something strange to interrupt my night. I sat there for a bit, engine running, lights on the building. I scanned the area, but didn't see anything unusual, just trees and shadows. I turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and deep. It wrapped around me like a blanket. I could hear my own breathing. I stepped out of the car and stood there listening. Still nothing. I don't know why, but I walked toward the cabin. My shoes crunched on dry leaves. The air smelled like dirt and old wood. The door was cracked open slightly, like someone had left in a hurry but didn't care enough to close it. I pushed it open slowly. The hinges squeaked. Inside, it was dark, but my phone's flashlight lit up the room enough to see. It was one big space, mostly empty. Some broken furniture, a mattress in the corner, a few scattered on the floor. It looked like someone had squatted there a while ago, but hadn't been back in years. Dust covered everything. I walked around a little, careful not to step on anything sharp. In the back corner, I noticed a hatch in the floor. It was partially covered by an old rug. I moved it aside and saw a wooden trapdoor with a metal handle. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking straight. My curiosity had taken over completely. I pulled the hatch open and it creaked loudly. A smell hit me right away, damp earth, mold, and something else I couldn't place. It wasn't strong, just off. There was a ladder leading down into darkness. I shined my light down. The ladder went maybe 10 feet. At the bottom, it looked like there was a small space carved out, maybe a root cellar. I hesitated. My heart was beating fast. I knew I should leave, but part of me felt like I had to see it. So I climbed down, one hand on a ladder, the other holding my phone. The floor was dirt. The walls were rough and lined with old boards. It wasn't a big space, maybe 6 by 10 feet. There were shelves on one side with old jars and rusted cans. I turned slowly, my light following the walls. In the far corner, something was covered with a tarp. I walked closer. The tarp was stiff and crusted with dirt. I pulled it back slowly. Underneath was a pile of bags. Black trash bags, tightly tied. The smell hit harder now. It was rot. Something dead. My mouth went dry. I stepped back, but I couldn't stop looking. I reached out and poked one of the bags with the toe of my shoe. It didn't move. I bent down, using 2 fingers to pull at the knot of the top bag. The plastic tore slightly, and something dark oozed out. I dropped the light and stumbled back, barely keeping myself from throwing up. I didn't need to see more. I knew what it was. Meat. Flesh. But not from any animal. I scrambled up the ladder, my heart thudding in my chest, so hard I thought it would burst. I slammed the hatch shut and ran out of the cabin, not bothering to close the door behind me. I jumped in my car and started it with shaking hands. The tires spun in the dirt before grabbing and shooting forward. I didn't look back. I drove fast, headlights bouncing on the uneven road, trees blurring past. I didn't stop until I hit the main road again. Back in town, I pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there for a long time just breathing. I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. My brain kept trying to find another explanation, something rational. But I knew what I saw. I didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe fear. Maybe denial. I told myself someone else would find it. That maybe it wasn't what I thought. But deep down, I knew I'd seen human remains. Whoever had stayed in that cabin, maybe recently, maybe years ago, had done something horrible, and I'd walked right into it. For weeks, I had nightmares. I'd see the bags in my dreams. I'd smell that awful scent again. I started locking every door, every window. I stopped driving at night. I avoided back roads, forests, anything that reminded me of that place. I kept checking the news, waiting to hear something, a discovery, an investigation, but nothing ever came up. Months passed. Eventually, the nightmares faded, but the memory didn't. It's still there always. When I drive alone, especially late at night, I feel that weight again, the pressure in the air. And I wonder if someone else is out there right now, finding a strange side road and pulling off into the woods, not knowing what they're walking into. I wonder if that cabin is still standing, or if someone went back and cleared it out. But I'll never go back. Not to that road. Not to that place. I saw enough. And I learned that some things, some places you're not meant to find. Not every quiet night is peaceful. Sometimes the silence is just hiding something waiting in the dark. It was early September when I found the cabin listing online. I had been working remote for over a year and wanted to get out of the city just for a while. I searched for places in the mountains, far from traffic, phones, and people. The one that caught my eye was a small, wooden cabin deep in the northern woods. The pictures showed it surrounded by thick pine trees with no other houses in sight. The owner described it as secluded, quiet, and perfect for solitude. That's exactly what I wanted. I booked it for 3 weeks. When I arrived, the sky was overcast and the wind was heavy through the trees. The road was mostly gravel for the last 10 miles. My car bounced as I drove slowly over potholes and loose rocks. The trees got denser the farther I went. I hadn't seen another car or house since I left the highway. The signal on my phone dropped completely about 5 miles back. It was just me in the woods now. The cabin looked older in person than in the photos. The paint on the wood siding had mostly peeled off and the windows were cloudy. Still, it stood strong and there was no sign of damage. The roof looked good and the door was solid. I parked next to the porch and started unloading my stuff. There was a small metal mailbox nailed to a post, even though I doubted anyone delivered mail out there. The air smelled like damp moss and old leaves. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The owner wasn't there when I arrived. He had said in the listing that he lived nearby and would leave the key under the flower pot by the steps. I found it a rusty old thing that looked like it belonged to a school locker more than a front door. Still, it worked. Inside, the cabin was plain. There was a small kitchen with an old electric stove, a fridge from maybe the 70s, and a narrow sink. The main room had a couch, a wood stove, and a dusty armchair. A bedroom was in the back with a creaky metal bed frame and a thin mattress. Everything smelled faintly of smoke and mildew, but it was what I wanted, quiet and away from everything. The first few days were peaceful. I spent most of the time reading or sitting outside, just listening to the wind and the trees. Sometimes I walk a few miles down the trails near the cabin. I never saw anyone else. That was part of the appeal. Then on the 4th day, I noticed something strange. When I came back from a hike, I saw that one of my bags had been moved. I had left it zipped and sitting on the kitchen table, but now it was on the floor, unzipped. At first, I thought maybe I had knocked it over without realizing, but I had a weird feeling in my stomach. It felt wrong. I checked the bag. Nothing seemed missing, just touched. My clothes weren't folded the way I had packed them. I told myself not to panic. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the wood made me sit up in bed. I kept telling myself it was an old house and the wind was strong. But the feeling stayed with me, like I was being watched. The next morning, I found boot prints in the dirt behind the cabin. I hadn't walked there. They weren't mine. They were deep and wide, from a man's boot, and led from the woods straight up to the back window. Then they turned and went back into the trees. I didn't know what to do. There was no cell signal. I didn't have a gun, just a camping knife and a hatchet I kept for splitting firewood. I thought about leaving, but the nearest town was over an hour away, and I'd already paid for the rental. I told myself maybe it was a hunter passing through. That afternoon, I walked around the cabin, checking all the windows and doors. Everything was locked. Still, I felt exposed. I kept looking out the windows, waiting to see movement between the trees. That evening, just before dark, someone knocked on the front door. I froze. It was a loud, slow knock. Not rushed, just steady. I stayed still for a long time. The knocking didn't come again. I looked through the small front window, careful to stay hidden. There was a man standing just off the porch. He was tall and broad, wearing a thick green coat and a gray beanie. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. I didn't open the door. I didn't make a sound. I just waited. After maybe 2 minutes, he turned and walked into the woods. I stayed up all night. I kept the lights off and sat by the window with the hatchet. I didn't see him again. The next morning, I stepped out carefully and looked around. No sign of anyone. Later that day, just before dusk, I heard something out back. I ran to the rear window. There, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the same man. He was watching the cabin, not moving, just standing there, arms at his sides. I stared at him, not sure what to do. After maybe 10 seconds, he walked slowly into the woods and disappeared. I didn't sleep that night either. The next day, I started packing my things. I wasn't going to stay. I figured I'd drive to the nearest town and try to find somewhere else, maybe a motel. I loaded everything into the car, locked up, and was about to get in the driver's seat when I saw a note tucked under the windshield wiper. It was a piece of paper folded in half. No envelope. I opened it and read the words written in large, crooked letters. Stay inside at night. That was it. No name. No explanation. I got in the car and drove. I didn't care about getting my money back. I just want to be around people again. I made it to the town after an hour and found a small inn. I told the guy at the desk I had a weird experience and wanted a room for a few days. He didn't ask questions. I stayed there that night, slept finally, and tried to calm down. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's office. I told them what happened. They listened but didn't seem surprised. One of the deputies asked if I rented that cabin near Raven Ridge. I said yes. He sighed and said they'd had calls about it before. Turns out, the owner, an older guy named Clive, lived in a trailer about a half-mile from the cabin, hidden in the woods. The land was all his. He used to live in the cabin before renting it out. Locals said he'd gotten paranoid over the years, believed people were trying to steal from him. He'd wander his land at night, sometimes peeking into windows, sometimes knocking on doors just to see who'd answer. They said he wasn't dangerous, just strange, liked to scare renters. Maybe didn't want to give up his space entirely. I asked why they let him keep renting it if people kept calling. The deputy just shrugged, said no one ever got hurt, said Clive wasn't breaking any laws as long as he didn't come inside. That was it. I drove back home the next day. I still think about that cabin, the man outside, the note on the windshield, the way everything felt off the moment I stepped through the door. Maybe Clive was just a lonely old man who wanted to scare people off. Maybe he thought the woods were his and anyone staying there was trespassing, even if they paid. I'll never really know, but I do know this. I'll never rent a cabin that far out again. I don't care how quiet it is. I don't care how many stars it has online. Some places are quiet for a reason, and some people like it that way. It was sometime in the late 80s or maybe the early 90s. I was around 6 or 7 years old, definitely still in that little kid phase where I relied on my older sister for just about everything. She was about 14 or 15, a good bit older than me, and because of that we got along really well. She was more like a second mom than just a big sister. We lived in a small town in West Texas, one of those places where you can walk into the gas station and the person behind the counter knows who your parents are, maybe even what church they go to. Everyone knew everyone. Our neighborhood was quiet. Most of the houses were older, built in the 60s or 70s, single-story homes with big yards and chain-link fences. The kind of place where people didn't lock their doors until something gave them a reason to. It was winter, and even though most people don't think about the desert being cold, it gets bad out there. The dry air bites at you, and the wind cuts right through your clothes. That night it had gotten dark by 6 p.m. By 8 p.m. it felt like the middle of the night. My parents had gone out, maybe to a church function or a dinner with friends. I don't remember now, just that it wasn't unusual. My sister babysat me often, and that night was no different. We were in the common room, the big space where our family hung out, watched TV, opened Christmas presents, whatever. That was the heart of the house. The TV was one of those big wooden console types, heavy and low to the floor, with a glowing screen that flickered and popped faintly when it was on. We were watching one of those crime news shows. Could have been 48 hours, maybe hard copy, something along those lines. The kind of show that played dramatic music over slow zoom-ins on crime scene tape and sad parents. They were talking about a manhunt for some lunatic who had murdered his neighbors and taken their young daughter. One of those stories that makes your skin crawl, even if you're too young to understand everything. The common room had two doors. The front door, which led to a small covered porch with a rocking chair and a couple planters, and the back door, which was almost entirely glass, part of a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the backyard. At night, with no porch light on, those windows became giant black mirrors. You couldn't see outside, just your own reflection, kind of warped depending on the angle. The front door was solid wood, no peephole, nothing to see through, but outside it was a storm door with a big pane of glass. We were sitting on the floor with some blankets and pillows, close to the TV, because that's what kids do. The show had been going on for about 45 minutes when, out of nowhere, we heard a loud, rapid banging on the front door. Not a knock. This was 3 hard slams, one after the other, bam, bam, bam. The kind of sound that makes your heart skip, makes your stomach twist. I screamed. My sister screamed. For a second it felt like everything stopped. Then silence. No movement, no more banging. Just silence. The only lights in the house were from the kitchen, which was down the hall behind us, and the flickering blue-white glow from the TV. We stared at the door, waiting. After a minute, we started to think maybe it was the wind. We'd had strong winds all week, the kind that made the windows creak and blew dirt into every crack. We had some stuff out on the porch. Maybe a planter tipped over or something got blown against the door. That would explain the sound, right? Another minute passed. We were still huddled together, barely breathing. Then we heard it. The sound of the storm door outside the front door closing. That gentle metallic thunk. That sound doesn't happen unless someone opens the storm door and lets it shut behind them. We hadn't heard open. Just slam, silence, then the door closing. That meant someone had been there. They'd opened the storm door and hit the wooden door, then just stood there for a minute before leaving or not leaving. We didn't move. My sister slowly crawled toward the TV and turned it off. That old set had a big metal dial, and when she clicked it to the off position, it made a solid thunk. Now the only light was from the kitchen, barely reaching into the room. Shadows stretched across the floor. I sat on my knees, legs folded underneath me, not even aware of how tense my body was. I remember turning around to look at the back windows. The glass door was part of a wide wall of glass, like I said, and it was all pitch black outside. Just our reflections staring back at us. I remember how cold the room suddenly felt. That kind of cold that creeps in from your skin to your bones. And then I saw it. The handle on the back door was moving. Not fast, not shaking, just slowly turning. It was locked at the knob, but didn't have the deadbolt on. The knob turned a little, gently, like someone was testing it. Then it stopped. A couple seconds passed. Then came the violent shaking. Bam, 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 bam. The door shook so hard the glass vibrated. The whole wall of windows shook, and with every movement, our reflections blurred and then snapped back into focus. Like when you're looking at yourself in rippling water. It felt like the whole back wall was going to give in. My heart was pounding so loud in my chest, I couldn't hear anything else. My sister screamed louder than I'd ever heard her scream. She grabbed my arm and yanked me off the floor, half dragging me down the hall into her bedroom. She slammed the door shut behind us and started shoving things in front of it. Her mattress, a laundry basket, the old wooden dresser. Anything she could move. She had grabbed the phone, one of those thick beige cordless ones with the long antenna. Back then, you had to direct dial the sheriff's office unless you called 911. In her panic, she couldn't remember the number. She just hit redial and got one of her friends. I remember her gasping into the phone, her voice breaking, begging someone to come over. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember hearing her curse, really curse, and it stuck with me. It didn't feel like how people talk in movies. It was desperate and real. I curled up on the floor. My knees were pressed to my chest, arms wrapped tight around my legs. I was shaking so hard my teeth hurt from clenching. We stayed like that, silent, just listening. We didn't hear anything else. No more banging. No footsteps. No talking. Just the wind outside and the occasional creak of the house settling. After what felt like forever, might have been 10 minutes, might have been 30, we saw headlights sweep across the front of the house. My sister ran to the window and pulled the curtain back. It was her friend and the girl's parents. They jumped out of the car, her dad carrying a flashlight. We ran to the front door and opened it. They came inside, looked around, checked the back door, but there was nothing. No broken glass, no footprints, just a few scuff marks near the bottom of the back door. We weren't even sure if those marks had been there before or not. We never found out who it was. My parents came home a little later and the police were called. They took statements but didn't find anything. No reports of break-ins in the neighborhood. No strange cars seen nearby. Just us, a quiet house, and something or someone that tried the front door, then the back, then disappeared. After that night, we never forgot to lock both the knob and the deadbolt. Ever. Even in broad daylight. Even if we were just taking out the trash. That kind of fear, it stays with you. It settles deep. My sister and I still talk about it sometimes. Just the two of us, never around other people. Nobody else would really get it. It wasn't some story you tell a sleepover to get a cheap scare. It was real, and for whatever reason, nothing ever happened again. But once you've heard that sound, someone testing the handle of your door in the dark, you don't sleep quite the same again. My boyfriend C and I took a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. We both loved hiking and being off the grid sometimes, so I found this Airbnb that seemed perfect for us. It was listed as an off-grid cabin and had a few hundred reviews, all 5-star. People said it was peaceful, cozy, secluded, all the things we were looking for. It didn't seem sketchy at all. The listing said there was no electricity and no running water, but we were used to roughing it, and honestly, that was part of the charm. The photos showed a small one-room wooden cabin with a tiny loft area, a potbelly stove, a fire pit out front, and surrounded by forest. It was down a dirt road, with the closest house being about half a mile away, owned by the host. She wasn't going to be home during our stay, which meant we'd have the place completely to ourselves. We got there around 4 p.m. The dirt road had been long and bumpy, but the forest around it was beautiful, lush green, and quiet in that peaceful Vermont way. We parked the car about 100 feet from the cabin and carried our stuff in. It was a warm afternoon. The cabin was even smaller in person, but it was cute. The inside had one big room with a little wooden table and 2 chairs, a couple of shelves with dishes, some candles, a small cooler for food, and that old black potbelly stove in the corner. There was a wooden ladder that led up to the loft, which was just a platform big enough for a full-size mattress. The mattress had a thin cover on it, and we had brought our own sleeping bags. Everything smelled like wood and dust, but it was cozy. The place was surrounded by tall trees. You couldn't hear anything but birds, the occasional insect, and the wind. We spent the rest of the afternoon making dinner over a little propane stove and played some board games by candlelight once it got dark. It felt like we had gone back in time. No cell service, no internet, just the two of us in the quiet woods. By 10 p.m., we were exhausted. We'd hiked most of the day before arriving, and we both felt the kind of tired that settles deep in your body. I climbed up to the loft to sleep, while C stayed outside to smoke and look at the stars. He liked being outside at night, said it helped him think. I was in that place between being awake and asleep, not dreaming yet, but not aware either, when I was suddenly jolted awake by a loud, banging noise on the side of the cabin. It was so loud and sharp, like someone had slammed a wooden bat or a log against the wall. My eyes flew open, and for a second, I just lay there frozen, listening. My heart started pounding. I was confused and half asleep still, unsure if it was real or in my head. But then I heard C's voice from below asking if that had been me. His voice sounded slightly tense, not panicked but not casual either. I yelled down that it wasn't me and asked if he had done it. He said no. He said he hadn't seen anyone, so he assumed maybe a tree branch fell. It didn't sound like a branch. It sounded like something hit the cabin. We weren't the type to scare easily. We'd camped plenty of times before, even in bear country. You hear noises at night. You learn to ignore most of them, but something about that sound didn't feel random. It had weight and purpose behind it. I was trying to tell myself it was probably a branch, maybe a deer ran into the cabin or something. I started to drift off again when there was another bang. This one sounded lower and more drawn out, like a heavy, swaying motion had slammed into another side of the cabin. That was enough. I climbed down from the loft, wide awake now. C came in through the front door just as I reached the bottom of the ladder. He had a serious look on his face and told me quietly to grab anything sharp I could find and go back upstairs. He was holding his hunting knife and had found a long stick outside. I asked him what was going on, and he just said he wasn't sure. He hadn't seen anyone, but said he thought he might have heard footsteps off in the trees. I grabbed a few steak knives from the shelf and climbed back up, heart racing. I was still trying to stay calm, but my hand was shaking. Then we both heard it, a soft scraping noise along the side of the cabin. It wasn't fast or loud, but long and slow, like someone was dragging a metal rake or something sharp across the wall. It lasted about 3 feet and then stopped. There was no sound after that for a while, and in that silence, everything became louder. The creaks of the cabin, the buzzing of insects, my own breath. I was scared now, really scared. Our car was 100 feet away, through thick trees and total darkness. There was no outside light, no moon, and the forest was black. If someone was out there, getting to the car would mean going right into whatever we were dealing with. I started thinking, what if they had messed with the tires or blocked the road? What if this was planned? It crossed my mind that someone could have seen our reservation and waited for us. The host house was half a mile away, and she wasn't even there. We were completely alone. C told me to stay silent and stay in the loft. He sat downstairs, watching the windows. The whole cabin had these big windows on 3 sides, and half of them were just screens. It would have been easy for someone to cut through and climb in. I wanted to stay down with him, but he said it would be easier to deal with whoever it was without me in the way. He was calm, but I could see the tightness in his face. I climbed back up and sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching a knife in each hand. I didn't even know how I'd use them if I had to. So he called out a loud hello to see if anyone would answer. Nothing. No reply. The forest didn't even seem to echo. It just swallowed the sound. Maybe 20 minutes passed, and then the scraping started again, louder this time, right under one of the windows. Then slow, deliberate footsteps. Crunch, 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 circling the cabin. Every step was heavy and paced, not like an animal, not random. It moved around the sides of the cabin and then stopped. Another 10 minutes went by, then a loud metallic rattling noise began, like something was shaking or climbing the metal pipe outside that led into the potbelly stove. It clanked and creaked for a while and then stopped again. C finally climbed up to the loft and pulled the ladder up behind him. He said it felt like someone out there could see him, but he couldn't see them, and he didn't like that. From up in the loft, at least we had one way up and could jump down if we had to. We sat on the bed, back to back, gripping knives, listening. I was shaking so hard my teeth hurt. The noises continued through the night, banging, scraping, and footsteps, always in short bursts, never constant, like someone was testing us, like they were trying to keep us guessing, keep us scared. At one point, something hit the wall hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. We just stared at each other. I kept expecting to hear a window break or the door fly open, but it never happened. Whoever it was, if it was even a person, never came inside, but they never left either. Eventually, around 5 a.m., I started to hear roosters in the distance. Birds chirped and the light began to slowly filter into the loft. That gray-blue light of early dawn. And with the light, the sounds finally stopped. Nothing more. No footsteps. No scraping. Just silence. We stayed in the loft for another hour, just to be sure. I got maybe 2 hours of sleep, and then we started packing. The car was fine. Tires untouched. Nothing weird around it. So we walked around the cabin, looking for tracks or marks or anything that could explain what had happened. Nothing. No scrape marks. No broken branches. No prints. It was like whatever happened, it had left no trace at all. I messaged the Airbnb host to let her know what had happened. She replied a few hours later, saying it was probably a porcupine. I don't know what kind of porcupine drags metal tools and walks like a person, but okay. To this day, C thinks it was some local trying to scare us off. Maybe a hunter or some off-grid neighbor who didn't want people nearby. I don't know. I've run through every possibility in my head. Animal, drunk person, prankster, someone mentally unstable, but none of them totally fit. All I know is that we weren't alone that night. Something was out there, circling the cabin, testing the walls, making noise on purpose. And I still don't know what it was or what they wanted. But I'm really glad we got out of there without finding out. It happened over 10 years ago, but I still think about it sometimes when the house gets too quiet or when I find myself alone at night. There wasn't anything supernatural about it. No ghosts or floating lights, no monsters in the dark. But the way it all unfolded, the way it started from something so ordinary and ended with something that I still don't have a good explanation for, it stays with me. It started with a phone call. At the time, I was married. Things weren't perfect between us, but we were still trying. My wife worked nights as a nurse and usually slept during the day, so we didn't talk much when I was at work. She rarely called unless it was something urgent. So when my phone buzzed that day around 1 p.m. and I saw her name, I felt a jolt of concern. I was at my desk in a quiet corner of the office, sorting through inventory records for a supplier we were dealing with. I stepped out to the hallway to take the call. She sounded a little out of breath, like she'd just woken up or had been crying. I asked if everything was okay. She told me she didn't remember her dream, but it had shaken her up bad. She said it was one of those dreams where you wake up and your heart is pounding, and even though you can't recall the details, the feeling clings to you like sweat after a nightmare. She didn't know what had happened in the dream, just that it had something to do with my friend Danny. She wanted me to call him. She said, just call and check on him. Please, just make sure he's okay. I remember pausing, unsure what to make of it. My wife wasn't someone who said stuff like that. She wasn't into spiritual things or dream meanings or any of that. She was practical, a bit cynical even. I asked if something had happened, if there was a reason to be worried. She just said, I don't know. I don't remember. Just call him. I agreed, more to ease her mind than anything else. Danny was one of my oldest friends. We'd grown up in the same neighborhood, played baseball together as kids, gone on fishing trips as teenagers. He was a good guy, had a wife, 2 kids, a decent job working for a construction company. I figured a quick call wouldn't hurt. I called him maybe 10 minutes later. He picked up on the second ring, sounding relaxed, maybe a little amused when I told him about my wife's dream. I said it was probably nothing, but she was worked up about it and just wanted to make sure he was okay. He laughed, told me to thank her and that everything was fine. The kids were at school, his wife was out running errands, and he was home on a day off, doing yard work and enjoying the sunshine. I told him to take care and hung up. When I called my wife back and told her everything was fine, I expected her to feel better, maybe even laugh a little. But she was quiet. Then she said, I don't know. It still feels wrong. Something about it doesn't feel right. She sounded unsettled in a way that stuck with me, even though I tried to brush it off. I told her to try and go back to sleep, that I'd be home in a few hours. She said okay and hung up, but her voice didn't sound convinced. I went back to work and tried not to think about it. By then I had convinced myself it was just a strange coincidence. Maybe she had dreamed about something that felt urgent. Maybe she'd seen something on TV the night before that triggered it. Who knows? It didn't matter because Danny and his family were okay, but they weren't. It wasn't until later that night, after dinner, that I got a call. This time it was Danny. I could tell right away something was wrong. His voice was thin and shaky, like he was barely holding it together. He told me his uncle from Florida had called him a few hours after I did. His uncle had just gotten the news. Danny's teenage son, Kyle, had died. He had hanged himself in the garage at his mother's house. The timing was brutal. It had happened earlier that day, probably not long before I called Danny to check on him. Kyle had been living part-time with his mom, Danny's ex. They had split up years ago, but shared custody. Kyle was a quiet kid. I remembered him from the times I went over to Danny's place for cookouts. He always seemed polite, kept to himself, had a kind of shy smile. Danny never mentioned anything about Kyle being troubled. Looking back, maybe there were signs, but they weren't the kind you notice until it's too late. I didn't know what to say. Danny was broken. The way he talked, like he was floating above the conversation, like the shock hadn't fully sunk in yet. I told him I was sorry, that I couldn't imagine what he was going through. I don't even remember what else I said. Words didn't feel like enough. After I hung up, I told my wife. She didn't react right away. She just stared at me like she was trying to process it. Then she sat down and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she said, "I knew something was wrong. I could feel it." And then she started to cry. We didn't talk much about it after that. There wasn't much to say. The dream had come out of nowhere, hit her like a freight train, and somehow pointed at something real and horrible. She never remembered the details of it, never could explain what made her so sure it had to do with Danny. But she'd felt it deep in her bones, enough to wake up in the middle of the day and call me, enough to tell me to reach out. The whole thing shook me. I've never been someone who believes in premonitions or psychic connections or anything like that. I still don't. I try not to read too much into it, but I also can't explain it. What are the chances? What do you even call something like that? A coincidence? Maybe. Maybe it was all just a strange alignment of events. Her dream, my call, the timing of the news. Maybe there was no deeper meaning to any of it. But part of me still wonders. Not about ghosts or fate or anything supernatural, but about how sometimes people can feel things they don't understand. How our minds can pick up on things we can't explain. Like a wire humming with static. Like a radio tuning into a frequency just for a moment before losing the signal. Danny and I still talk sometimes, though not as much. He moved away a few years after Kyle's death. Got remarried, started over. But he's not the same. I see it in his eyes, in the way he carries himself. There's a weight that doesn't go away. I can't blame him. My wife and I split up a couple years later. It wasn't because of what happened, but I think that moment left a crack between us that never quite healed. We went through the motions for a while, but something had changed. Something deep. We both felt it. Now, every once in a while, I'll think about that day. The way she called me out of nowhere. The sound of her voice. The certainty in it. The way something she couldn't remember turned out to be right. I still don't know what to make of it. I don't think I ever will. But it happened. It's real, and I'll never forget it. I used to work search and rescue in Colorado, based out of Eagle. Spent 6 years with the team. Most of our calls were people getting turned around on trails, sometimes twisted ankles, dehydration, or people who pushed further than they should have before sunset. But every now and then, you get a call that sticks with you, one that you carry for a long time. For me, it was Darren. It was late July, hot days and cool nights, the kind of weather that makes people feel overconfident. Darren was 35, experienced, knew his stuff. He'd been up in the Flat Tops wilderness before, and this time he went solo. No issue with that, plenty of people do. But he had a sat phone, which gave us some comfort if something did go wrong. According to his permit and log, he planned to be out 3 days. We got the call on day 5. No check-in, no return. Last satellite ping from his phone was 2 days prior, about 15 miles into the bush. The terrain was rough but manageable, thick pine, uneven ridgelines, a few old rock slides scattered through. No cell service out there. We knew time was already against us. I went in with Mike, another SAR guy I've been working with for a few years. Good man, level-headed and tough. We flew in by chopper and landed on a narrow clearing about 2 miles from the last ping. Right off the bat, we picked up what looked like his trail. Some crushed brush, slight boot prints. From the way they looked, we guessed it was probably a day old. Darren moved light, probably only a small pack. We followed the prints for about 2 hours before we hit a narrow ledge overlooking a drop into thick timber. There were signs he might have slipped, disturbed gravel, broken twigs, but no sign of a fall. Nothing below, either. It was strange. Most people who go over a ledge leave something. Torn fabric, blood, something. But this was clean. We fanned out, checked both sides, dropped down a little, but didn't find anything. Around mid-afternoon, as we were moving uphill through a cluster of boulders, we picked up something odd on our comms. A voice. It crackled through the walkie on the open channel. Not loud, not clear, but it stopped both of us in our tracks. "Help, I'm here," it's Darren. "Can't see, can't move, it's watching me." We just stood there, letting the static roll until it cut off. I've heard garbled signals before, wind, overlapping channels, but this was a voice. Distinct, weak like it wasn't meant for us, but still came through. Mike looked at me. I could tell he was thinking what I was. It was Darren. We tried hailing back, over and over, switching between channels, asking for confirmation, anything. Nothing. No GPS ping, no follow-up. Then, after a few minutes, the signal came again, even fainter. It's cold. I didn't fall. Don't let it take me. After that, just static. We stayed there a long time, just listening. It didn't make sense. The sat phone's last ping had been 2 days ago, and there was no indication Darren had a walkie compatible with ours. Even if he did, he needed to be on the same frequency. It didn't add up. Still, we marked the spot and kept going in the direction his trail had been headed. Terrain got worse. Denser woods, a lot of deadfall, and tight gullies. We found a few more boot prints, then nothing. It just stopped like he vanished mid-step. We searched for 3 more days, extending out in every direction, sweeping back toward the ledge, up ridges, down valleys. Dogs couldn't pick up anything. No gear, no torn fabric, no food wrappers, nothing, just gone. Then on the 3rd day, in a shallow tree basin, we found his sat phone. It was 10 feet up, resting in a pine tree, like someone had placed it there. Not dropped, no broken branches, no sign of how it got there. It just sat wedged in a crook of the branches, as if someone had reached up and stuck it there. Mike had to climb up to get it. The battery was nearly dead. We plugged it into a portable charger and looked through the gallery. Only one photo stood out. It was the last one he took, time-stamped a day before the last sat ping. Just a selfie, Darren's face in frame, lit by flash. He looked panicked, eyes wide, mouth open like mid-scream, like something startled him just as he pressed the shutter. At first, that's all we saw. Then Mike pointed to the reflection in his eye. There was something there. Something small, but sharp-looking. Like a shape, not quite human. Angular, like something crouched just out of view, close to him. We stared at that image for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Could have been a shadow, a trick of light, but something about it didn't sit right. We brought the phone back, handed it over to the officials. They ran their checks. Nothing new came up. The audio we caught couldn't be traced. The photo didn't show enough for anyone to be sure. The official report lists Darren as presumed dead. Cause unknown. I never liked that phrasing, but we didn't have anything better. His family held a memorial a month later. The whole thing bothered me more than I want to admit. I kept thinking about that signal. His voice coming through like that. The way he said, "Don't let it take me." That wasn't panic. It was fear, sure, but a different kind. Like he knew what was coming and couldn't stop it. And then the sat phone, in a tree, 10 feet up. I've been on over 100 searches, seen what hypothermia does, what panic does, how people act when they're scared and lost. But this wasn't that. Darren didn't leave, gear scattered in desperation. He didn't try to signal or mark his trail. He just vanished, like someone reached down and pulled him out of the world. After the report closed, Mike and I sat down over a beer, talked through everything again. We ran theories, animal attack, disorientation, even foul play. But nothing fit. No tracks, no blood, no signs of a struggle. No human sent trail past that last boot print. Just one picture, one voice transmission, and a phone in a tree. I quit that fall, put in my papers, packed my gear, and moved down to New Mexico. I told the team I was tired, burnt out. Truth is, I didn't want to go back into those woods. Not after what we heard. Not after what we found. I still go hiking, but never alone and never anywhere near the flat tops. Sometimes, when I'm walking in the early morning and everything's still and quiet, I think about that voice crackling through the radio. How clear it was. How scared he sounded. I don't know what happened to Darren out there, but I know he didn't fall. He didn't just get lost. Something else happened. And whatever it was, I want no part of it. It started when I booked a random Airbnb in northern Michigan. I didn't care where exactly. I just wanted to be alone for a few days. Work had burned me out, and I was in one of those moods where everything felt like noise. The listing didn't have a lot of reviews, but the pictures looked all right. It was a small house out in the woods, close to a lake, quiet and surrounded by trees. That's what I wanted. I booked it for 5 nights, packed some basic clothes, a couple frozen meals, and drove up. It took about 6 hours. By the time I reached the house, it was late afternoon, around 5. The sun was low, the trees were casting long shadows. There was no one for miles. The road leading up to the property turned into dirt, then gravel, and then just packed mud. My tires slipped a little, but I made it. The house was smaller than it looked in the pictures. Kind of narrow. The siding was old and fading. The windows were dusty. It had a wide porch with a single wooden chair that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The front door stuck a bit when I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, but not filthy. The lights worked. The kitchen was tiny, with an old fridge that hummed loudly and a microwave from the early 2000s. There was one bedroom with a full-size bed, a closet, and a small dresser. The bathroom was surprisingly clean. No mold, just old. I put my bags down and walked through the house again. It creaked a lot. Every step made a sound. The floorboards were dry and stiff. In the kitchen, I found a drawer with a few mismatched utensils, one knife, and a bottle opener. The cabinets were almost empty, except for some expired tea bags and a bottle of vinegar. I made a mental note to keep the food I brought sealed. Outside, the forest pressed right up against the back of the house. There was no backyard, just a thin line of dead leaves before the trees took over. I didn't see any trail, no path through the woods, just solid forest. The lake, according to the map, was about a 5-minute walk straight ahead from the front of the house, but I didn't go looking for it the first day. I was too tired. I microwaved a frozen meal, sat in the silent kitchen while it spun, and tried not to notice how quiet everything was. No hum of traffic, no dogs barking, just the wind through the trees, and occasionally a sharp creak from the house like it was settling. That first night, I didn't sleep well. The bed was stiff and the sheets were scratchy. I woke up around 2 a.m. and felt like something had touched my leg, but when I reached down, it was just a sheet bunched up. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. There was no ceiling light in the bedroom, just a small lamp, and I'd turn it off before going to bed. But the room wasn't completely dark. There was a pale glow coming from the window. Moonlight, I thought, but it didn't look like moonlight. It had a kind of sharp, cold blue tone to it. Not the usual soft light you expect from the moon. I didn't get up to check. I just pulled the blanket over my head and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I made coffee with the old machine in the kitchen. It took forever to brew. I sat on the porch with my mug and listened. Still no sound. No birds, which I thought was weird. No insects either. Just wind. I walked out a bit toward the front where the trees were thinner. I couldn't see a road anymore. The dirt path I'd driven in on had completely blended into the landscape. I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure I could still see the house. I didn't want to get turned around. I gave up on finding the lake. I didn't trust my sense of direction out there. I spent the second day inside, mostly reading on my phone, staring out the window. Around late afternoon, I saw a man walking between the trees in the distance. He wasn't close, maybe 100 yards out, but I saw him. Just a figure in a brown jacket, walking slowly parallel to the tree line. I stayed still and watched. He didn't look toward the house. He didn't stop, just walked out of view. It rattled me because I hadn't heard a sound. No crunch of leaves, no snapping twigs. Nothing. I kept waiting for him to come back into view, but he didn't. I stayed near the front window until it got too dark to see outside. That night, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. They had old latches that didn't feel secure. I pushed a chair under the doorknob. Stupid, maybe, but I didn't care. Around midnight, I heard something on the porch. A scraping sound, like something light being dragged across the wood. I sat up in bed and held my breath. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't want to look. I stayed frozen for hours until the first bit of daylight came through the window. When I finally opened the door and looked outside, the wooden chair on the porch was gone. I found it later, lying on its side about 20 feet from the house. No footprints, just flattened grass. I didn't go outside again that day. I stayed inside with the curtains shut, listening. Around 3 p.m., I heard the fridge make a loud popping sound. Then the power went out. No lights, no microwave, nothing. I checked the breaker box, which was outside on the back wall. Everything looked fine, but I flipped the switches anyway. Nothing changed. The fridge was dead. My food was thawing. I stayed outside for maybe 30 seconds and kept glancing into the trees. I felt like I was being watched. That wasn't just paranoia. You know when you're alone and your brain tells you you're fine? This wasn't that. This was the opposite. My whole body was tense, like it was trying to warn me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner of the bedroom with a kitchen knife in my hand. The house was silent, but the silence felt too heavy, like something was pushing down on it. I started hearing things, not ghosts, not voices, just quiet sounds that didn't belong. The floor creaked once when I wasn't moving. A light tapping came from the back wall. I smelled something faint like sweat and damp wood. In the middle of the night, I swear I heard breathing right outside the bedroom window. Not loud, just soft, rhythmic like someone standing still. At dawn, I packed my stuff. I didn't care about the 5-day booking. I didn't care about getting a refund. I threw my bag in the car and left without eating or checking anything. I drove fast, the dirt and gravel kicking up behind me, and didn't stop until I hit a gas station with a working phone signal. I called the Airbnb number to report a problem with the listing. I didn't go into detail, just said the power failed and I didn't feel safe. The guy on the line said that was strange. Someone had just stayed there the week before and left a review saying the place was quiet and peaceful. I hung up. That was a year ago. I didn't write a review. I never heard anything else from the host. A few months later, out of curiosity, I searched the listing again. It was gone. No record. Not even in my account history. Like it had never existed. But I still have the pictures I saved when I booked it. The ones from the listing with the wide porch and the woods pressed against the back of the house. I sometimes look at them when I can't sleep, trying to figure out what exactly I experienced. I know there was no ghost, no creature, nothing supernatural. But someone was out there. Someone who knew how to stay hidden, how to move quietly, and how to make a person feel like they were never really alone. I don't book random rentals anymore. I don't go out into the woods alone. I don't care how cheap the price is or how nice the pictures look. If I can't see the property from a paved road, I'm not interested. I've learned to listen to that feeling, that weight in your chest that says something isn't right. Because once it starts, it doesn't go away. It stays with you every time you close your eyes in a quiet room, every time you wake up in the dark, not knowing what's outside your window. My grandmother's house is one of the oldest homes still standing in the area, built in the late 1700s. It's made of heavy stone and timber, and the floorboards creak no matter how softly you walk. The walls are thick, but the cold gets in anyway. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and never quite leaves. It smells old too, like dust, dried herbs, and something I could never really name. Something deeper, like the scent of time itself. The windows are warped and foggy in the morning. In the evenings, the sun filters through the trees outside and paints slow-moving shadows across the rooms. What makes it even stranger is that it's boxed in by 2 graveyards. One is older, barely legible stones, some leaning and broken, covered in moss. The other is more recent, a little more orderly but still worn and quiet. Both have tall black iron fences around them with gates that don't quite latch right. The house is dead center between the two, like someone built it with the intention of being surrounded by the dead. I used to joke about it when I was younger, but now that I'm older, it doesn't feel funny anymore. I never slept that well when I stayed there. A few days ago, an old friend of mine showed up after months of silence. He'd been away in a drug treatment center out in the desert. No contact, not even social media. He showed up out of the blue, looking thinner, clearer in the eyes. He had this calmness about him I didn't remember. We were walking slowly along the cobblestone driveway that leads from the main road up to the house. It's uneven, roots pushing up through the gaps, and you can tell it hasn't been touched in a long time. The stones are faded and cracked, like everything else around here. As we walked, he talked about his recovery, not in a dramatic way, just quiet and matter of fact. He said he'd been meditating, tuning into things he never noticed before. Not in a religious way, more like he could sense energy now. He said when he was high, everything was fogged up, but now he could feel things with a weird kind of clarity. I believed him. Something about the way he moved, the way he looked around like he was listening to things the rest of US couldn't hear. It made sense. He didn't need to convince me. We had only been walking for a few minutes when my cat came trotting over from the bushes near the front porch. Her name is Penny. She's small, gray and white, and she's never been much for strangers. But she came right over and started rubbing against my leg. At first, I just reached down and scratched behind her ears like I always did. But she wouldn't stop. She kept rubbing against me and walking a few feet ahead, then back to me again. I started paying more attention. Her tail was twitching, and her ears were angled back just a little. Not scared, but focused. It was like she was trying to get me to move. I looked at my friend, and we both just sort of understood that we were going to follow her. She led us across the overgrown lawn, past the old garden where my grandmother used to plant tomatoes and herbs, past the back corner of the house, and toward the older graveyard. It's easy to ignore that graveyard most of the time. The trees around it are thick and low, branches hanging like arms. The stones there are so worn you can hardly make out the names. Some are just nubs sticking up from the ground like teeth. The cat never looked back. Every time I slowed down or stopped, she would double back and rub hard against my shin, then dart ahead again. She did it over and over until I kept moving. It didn't feel playful. It felt urgent. We stepped through the iron gate, the hinges groaning as I pushed it open. I hadn't been in there for months, maybe longer. It smelled like wet leaves and old stone. The grass was long and patchy, the ground soft in places. Penny led us deep into the graveyard, weaving through the stones like she'd walked this path 100 times. Then she stopped. She leapt up onto one of the gravestones, landing on the thin top edge with a weird kind of balance I'd never seen from her before. She crouched there, stiff, her tail curled tightly around her paws. Her eyes were locked on us, wide and unblinking. When we got closer, she started hissing, low at first, then louder. Not at us, but at the idea of us moving her. My friend reached out toward her, and she hissed again, louder, then growled. She flattened her ears and dug her claws into the stone. She wasn't going anywhere. We looked at the headstone. It was thin and arched at the top, cracked down the middle. The writing was hard to read, but we could make out most of it after brushing off some moss. The name was Sarah M. Clark, born 1792, died 1835. Beneath the dates it said, beloved mother and keeper of this home. That last part hit hard. Keeper of this home. I had heard my grandmother mention something about the Clarks when I was a kid, maybe in passing. I never really listened. But I knew this house had been in the same family line since before the Civil War. It had passed down through generations, mostly women, always staying in the same name, until eventually it came my grandmother. The cat stayed perfectly still, crouched on that narrow stone. It didn't make sense, the way she balanced there. I'd seen her jump onto fences and narrow railings before, but never sit still like that, like she was guarding something, or waiting. My friend took out his phone and snapped a photo. He didn't say anything, just stepped back and took it like he was documenting something important. We stood there for a while, not talking, just looking at the stone, the cat, the trees beyond. Eventually, I crouched down and started reading some of the nearby stones. All the same last name, Clark, some with dates going back even further. Others only partially legible, worn by rain and time. It struck me how many people had lived and died within a few hundred feet of where I slept. How many had looked out the same windows, walked the same hallways. After a long time, Penny finally leapt down from the gravestone. She rubbed against my leg once, then walked back toward the house, slow and calm. We followed her without a word. When we got inside, she jumped up on the windowsill and curled into a tight ball, eyes half closed like nothing had happened. That night, my friend and I sat at the old kitchen table, the one with the cigarette burns and knife marks in it. He showed me the photo. The cat looked wild in it, like a statue, eyes sharp and mouth slightly open, mid-hiss. You could see the name on the gravestone clearly. Beloved mother and keeper of this home. There was something about the way the light hit the stone, the way the branches overhead cast a net of shadows across the cat's back. It didn't look staged. It didn't even look real, but it was. We didn't talk about it much after that. He left the next day, said he felt something shift inside him, like something he couldn't name had settled. I walked him out to his car, and we didn't say much. Just nodded. That was enough. I kept thinking about what it meant. About Sarah Clark. About the way Penny led us straight to her. Cats don't do things like that. Not unless they're scared or desperate. But she wasn't either of those things. She was sure of herself. She wanted us to see it, to know it. A few days later, I started reading through my grandmother's old papers. I found some handwritten notes tucked between pages of an old book, something about the Clark family and how the women had always taken care of the house. Some called it a blessing, some a curse, but they stayed generation after generation, always watching over the place. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not spiritual like my friend. I don't see ghosts or believe in signs. But that moment with Penny, that exact gravestone, it felt like a message. Not supernatural, just real. Like a reminder that we're not the first to live in these rooms, walk these halls, look out these windows. And maybe the ones who came before us aren't gone. Not in some fairy tale way, but in the way a house holds memories deep in its wood and the bones of its foundation. Maybe some things just stay quietly, waiting to be remembered. Me and my cousin Jake had been planning the Appalachian Trail for almost a year. We were both in decent shape, had done some shorter backpacking trips before, and figured 10 days on the trail would be tough but manageable. We started up in Tennessee and were heading south toward Georgia. The plan was to average about 15 miles a day, sleep in our tent or at the shelters if we could find them empty, and just be out in nature for a while, get away from everything. First few days were fine. Weather was a little damp the first day, but it cleared up. No big issues. We saw some deer, lots of squirrels, a few snakes, even a bear off in the distance one afternoon, but it wasn't close. Nights were cold, but manageable. It was day 4 when we found the rock. We were somewhere near the North Carolina border, pretty far from any main road. We were walking a stretch of trail that was kind of narrow, steep drop on one side, uphill slope on the other, when we passed a giant boulder, maybe 7 feet tall, covered in moss except for one side. It had words carved into it, not just scratched in, but really carved like someone had spent hours doing it. It said, "If you see this, go back. He follows at dusk." At first, we just stopped and looked at it. I remember staring at the letters. They were deep, not like a knife or even a rock had scratched them, more like chiseled. Looked like they'd been there a while too, maybe years. The edges were smoothed a bit. Moss was growing close to the text, but someone had scraped around it to keep the words visible. I took a picture of it. We both laughed. Thought maybe some creepy guy with a sense of humor had done it. Or maybe it was part of a scavenger hunt or something. Didn't seem like a big deal. We hiked on. No signs of anyone else on the trail. That night, we set up camp about 12 miles past the boulder, just off a flat part of the trail near a dried up creek bed. It was a quiet night at first. Made a fire, cooked some dehydrated chili, talked for a bit, then crawled into our tent. It was maybe 10:30 when I heard it. A sharp crack like a stick breaking. Loud. Close. I froze. Listened. Then nothing. Maybe 30 seconds later, another snap. A little closer. I sat up and whispered to Jake, but he was already awake. He said it was probably a raccoon or maybe a deer moving through. I didn't say anything else. I lay back down, but didn't fall asleep for a while. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, I stepped out of the tent and froze. There were boot prints in the dirt, maybe 10 or 12 feet from where we'd slept. One set, definitely not ours. The heel-to-toe marks were clean, like someone had walked quietly through soft ground. They came in from the woods, stopped near the tent, and went back the same way. No wandering around, just straight in, straight out. We hadn't seen anyone for at least 2 days. No campsites, no shelters nearby. I looked at Jake. He saw it too. Neither of us said much. We packed up fast. Next few days, same pattern. Hike all day, find a spot to camp, cook, try to sleep. But every night, we heard it. Snapping branches, soft footsteps, always just outside the firelight. Always just far enough that we couldn't see anyone, but close enough that it didn't feel like an animal. It never came rushing in, never made noise like a panicked deer or a curious raccoon. Just slow movement. I'd call out sometimes, but there'd be nothing. Just silence. Then, 10 minutes later, another twig snapped. We started taking turns staying awake, doing 2-hour shifts. I'd sit outside the tent with a flashlight, eyes peeled, try not to blink too long. Every time it was my shift, I felt sure I'd catch a glimpse of someone, but I never did. Nothing ever moved, but the sound was always there. Branches cracking, footsteps in the leaves. By day 7, we were jumpy, tired, hungry. Both of us weren't talking much. We just wanted to finish the trail, or at least get close to a road where we could call someone. That afternoon, we came to a rest hut. It was an old wooden shelter, like the kind you can sleep in during rain. Half a roof, 3 walls, open front, with a bench and a place to sit your pack. There was a trail notebook on the shelf. People write in them, leave notes, trail updates, whatever. I flipped through it, not really expecting anything, but near the middle, someone had written in big letters underlined, "He only follows the loud ones. Don't talk, don't run, don't look back." No date on it, no name, just that sentence. I felt sick when I read it. I handed it to Jake. He read it too. Neither of us said anything. We didn't stay there. We just kept walking. Didn't cook that night. Didn't make a fire. Just kept going. It was already getting dark, but we hiked anyway. For the first time, we hiked past dusk. Flashlights on, boots dragging. The forest felt tighter. Every noise sounded like it was following us. We didn't talk at all. At some point that night, I heard footsteps behind me. Not off in the woods this time. On the trail. On the dirt. I stopped walking and held my breath. The steps behind me stopped too. I didn't turn around. Just kept walking. The footsteps came back. Soft, steady, matching my pace. Jake was maybe 10 feet ahead of me, and I could see him stiffen up too. He heard it. We pushed on, 14 miles straight, didn't stop once. I don't remember most of it. Just trees. Dark. My own breathing. Once my flashlight started flickering and my stomach dropped. I smacked it a few times and it came back on. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, we hit a gravel road. No traffic, no houses, just road. We crossed it and slid down into the ditch on the other side and lay flat. Didn't speak, just lay there in the mud, backpack still on, faces in the grass, hearts pounding. After a while, I must have passed out. So did Jake. Sometime after sunrise, we heard a car. I stood up and waved it down. It was an old man in a pickup. He pulled over, looked at us, and didn't ask any questions. Just told us to get in the back. We rode to a gas station about 20 miles out. I called my brother. He drove 6 hours to pick us up. Jake didn't say a word the whole drive home. I kept thinking about the boot prints, the noises, that sentence in the notebook. I kept hearing the footsteps matching mine, how they stopped when I stopped, how they never came close, but never went away. Like whoever was knew how far to stay. Like they'd done it before. I haven't been on a trail since. Jake quit hiking altogether. Sold his gear. I kept mine, but I can't bring myself to use it. Sometimes I still look at the picture of the rock, the carving, the words. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know who follows the loud ones. I just know we were lucky to be quiet, lucky not to look back, and lucky we left when we did. I was about 4 or 5 years old when this happened. My parents had just separated not long before, and I was still trying to make sense of everything. My mom had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain ground-level unit in an old building with tan siding and rust-stained concrete steps. It had a creaky screen door out front and old plumbing that made strange sounds at night. But it felt okay. It felt like home enough, at least for a while. Even though I had my own room with a small twin bed, some toys on the shelves, and a cheap cartoon bedspread my mom bought for me, I hardly ever slept in there. I was young and nervous and hated the feeling of being alone in a new place. So most nights, I ended up sleeping in bed with my mom. Her room was across the hall from mine, and our doors were directly facing each other. You could look out from her bed and see straight into my room if the doors were open. It was summertime, and I remember the heat being thick and sticky, especially at night. We didn't have central air, just an old box fan that clanked softly in the corner, and the windows cracked open to let in the night breeze. The window in my mom's room was right behind the headboard of the bed. It stayed open most nights, screened, but open. The building sat on a slight hill, and behind our window was just a small grassy patch that led to a sidewalk and parking lot. That night, nothing seemed out of place. We'd had dinner earlier, mac and cheese, I think. I remember my mom turning off the kitchen light and walking me to the bathroom before bed. Then we curled up under the sheets in her room, the window open behind our heads, the curtains just barely swaying when the breeze came through. Our cat, a lazy gray tabby named Milo, had jumped up onto the bed like he always did and nestled down at our feet. I remember feeling safe then. Sleep came easily, but sometime during the night, I woke up. I don't know what exactly stirred me. There wasn't a noise or anything sudden. It was more like that quiet, alert feeling you get sometimes, like your body knows something before your mind catches up. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. The room was dark, but the hallway had a faint glow from the street lamp outside, casting just enough light through the front window for me to see the shape of the door frame clearly. That's when I noticed Milo. He was sitting at the doorway of my mom's room, perfectly still. He wasn't in bed anymore, which was strange because he never left the bed during the night. He was the kind of cat who didn't like the floor once he was comfortable. But there he was, sitting right on the edge of the doorway, just staring. He looked into my room across the hall. He didn't move at first, just stared. Then, after a few seconds, he stood up and walked slowly into my room. I remember watching him disappear through the door and then hearing a soft, single meow. That's when I felt the fear. I turned to wake up my mom. I didn't even know why yet. I just felt something wasn't right. I shook her gently and whispered something, maybe her name. It only took a few seconds, maybe 3 or 4, for her to start waking up and look at me. She was still blinking the sleep out of her eyes when we both turned back toward the doorway. And there was a man standing there. He was halfway into the hallway, coming out of my room. He wasn't rushing. He didn't look surprised. He was just there like he belonged. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. His face was in shadow, but I could tell he was watching us, just standing still. What happened next is still a blur, but I remember it clearly in pieces like flashes burned into my mind. My mom grabbed me under the arms and, without saying a word, threw me backward over her head and out the window. It was open already, and the screen must have been pushed out or torn because I went right through and landed in the grass behind the apartment. I hit the ground hard, but not enough to get hurt. Just enough to understand something was very wrong. A second later, my mom came tumbling out after me. She turned and yanked the screen the rest of the way out, jumped through, and grabbed me. I don't even remember screaming, but I know we both did. I think I started crying first, and she just started shouting. Not words, just loud panic sounds. Lights came on in other apartments. A porch light flicked on. Someone opened a door and looked out. It wasn't long before someone called 911. The police came pretty fast, maybe 5 minutes. They asked us questions. My mom was shaking, holding onto me tight. She kept saying the same thing over and over. She locked the door. She remembered locking it. Not just the knob, but the deadbolt and the chain too. She said she always did. That night was no different. She was sure, but the police didn't find any signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no damaged windows. Nothing. They said the front door was unlocked when they got there. That was it. The man must have walked out the front door after we escaped. They searched the apartment. Every room, every corner. Found nothing. No one. Nothing missing. It didn't make sense. They said maybe she forgot to lock the door, but she knew she hadn't. She was sure. We both knew it. For the next few nights, we didn't stay there. We went to my grandparents' place. My mom couldn't sleep. She kept checking the locks even there, over and over. I slept in the same bed with her, just like always. About a week later, we went back to the apartment during the day. My mom started cleaning. She was trying to get things back to normal, get back to some routine. She started in the kitchen, wiping down counters, taking out trash. Then she went to clean the water heater closet. It was a narrow little door next to the fridge. No reason to ever open it unless something was wrong. When she opened it that day, she found something sitting inside on the floor. There was a small, spiral-bound notebook, a cheap one with a red cover. Next to it was a pair of gloves, brown work gloves, worn out and stained, and a few crumpled gum wrappers. She opened the notebook. Inside were names, dates, and strange little drawings. Some were just stick figures. Some were faces. Some pages just had names written over and over again. None of the names meant anything to her. Some were women's names. Some had our apartment number written next to them. She called the police again. They came and took the items, but there wasn't much they could do. No fingerprints, no clear evidence of a crime they could prove beyond trespassing. They guessed the man might have been living in the apartment before we moved in. Maybe he had a key and had been coming back. Or maybe he'd gotten in somehow and was hiding in that closet the whole time. It made us sick to think about it, that he might have been in the apartment with us before, watching, listening, waiting. After that, we moved out. My mom didn't even finish the lease. We packed up and left a few weeks later. She got a new place across town, in a building with better security and no ground floor windows. I never slept in my own room again for a long time after that. I kept seeing that man in the doorway every time I closed my eyes, just standing there, watching us. We never saw him again. The police never caught anyone. But the notebook, the gloves, and those wrappers, they were real. I saw them with my own eyes. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a story. It happened. And it still makes my stomach turn when I think about how close he was. How quiet he was. How long he might have been there before we noticed. I had a job interview lined up in Arizona, a place I'd never been before. The company was in a town several hours from where I lived, so I figured I'd drive out and stay a few days, make a trip out of it, maybe explore the area a bit, see if it was somewhere I could see myself living. I looked at hotels first, but they were expensive and most of them were booked up anyway. I didn't have much money to spare, so I checked Airbnb and found this one little house that was half the price of the hotels. It was about 30 minutes from the office where I'd be interviewing. It was a small standalone place at the end of a long dirt road, just off a quiet two-lane highway. The picture showed a tiny house with a fenced-in yard and a big view of the desert in the back. No other homes around it, just land. It looked fine enough. I booked it for 3 nights, Monday through Thursday, and figured I'd head back home on Friday morning. I was working remotely at the time, so I brought my laptop with me to do some work during the day before and after the interview. I got there around mid-afternoon on Monday. The drive was long, and the last stretch of it had no gas stations or stores, just empty road and big open sky. When I finally turned off onto the little dirt road, I saw the house standing alone, low and square and brown like the dirt around it. It was quiet. I didn't see any other cars or people nearby. There was a fence around the property, but it looked more decorative than secure. The key was in a little lockbox next to the door, and the code had been sent to me through the Airbnb app. Inside, it was clean and plain. The floors were tile, the furniture was old but not dirty, and the kitchen had the basics. The bedroom had a full-size bed with white sheets, a nightstand, and a small dresser. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a smart TV mounted on the wall. Everything looked like it had been decorated with secondhand stuff, but I didn't mind. It was functional. The windows were small, and there were blinds on all of them, though a few didn't close all the way. The backyard had a little patio with a couple chairs, and then nothing but open desert beyond short fence. No lights out there, just dry bushes, dirt, and rocks. I spent Monday afternoon working on my laptop at the kitchen table. I was reviewing interview questions and reading up on the company. I wanted to be ready. Around 9 p.m., I was still at the table, staring at the screen, when I heard a soft tapping sound. It came from the living room window to my left. It wasn't loud, just one little tap, not like a knock, more like someone lightly touched the glass with the tip of their finger. I froze. My head turned toward the window. The blinds were halfway closed. It was pitch black outside, and the porch light didn't reach that window. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if I'd imagined the sound. Finally, I got up, walked over, and gently lifted the edge of the blinds. I didn't see anything, just the reflection of the room behind me and blackness outside. It could have been anything, I told myself. A bug, maybe, or the window settling. Arizona had weird insects after all. I went back to my work. The next day was the interview. I got dressed up, drove out to the office, and I think I did all right. It wasn't the best I'd ever done, but it wasn't the worst either. After it was over, I grabbed lunch and drove around a bit, checked out some neighborhoods, looked at the local stores. It was a quiet town, hot, dry, and spread out. Back at the Airbnb, I spent the evening sitting in the backyard with a cold drink, watching the sun go down. It was actually kind of peaceful. That dry desert air cooled off fast after sunset, and the sky went from orange to black real quick. I had this weird thought that maybe someone could be watching me from out in that dark space. It's just so open, and the bushes were low but spread out, perfect for someone to crouch behind. But I shook it off. That night, I was inside around the same time as the night before. I had Breaking Bad on the TV and was laying on the couch with the lights off, except for the one in the kitchen. Around halfway through an episode, I heard it again. That tap. This time it was louder, more definite. Just once. Same window. I sat up immediately. My stomach tightened. I paused the show and stared at the window. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I didn't want to lift them this time. I was hoping it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. I waited a bit, then walked quietly to the front door. I checked the peephole, then opened it slowly and stepped out onto the small porch. The air was cold, dead silent. No wind, no cars, nothing. I walked around the side of the house, staying close to the walls, and peeked into the backyard. Nothing. Then I stepped out onto the back porch and looked around. That's when I heard it. A clicking sound like someone clicking their tongue. It came from somewhere beyond the edge of the yard, past where the light reached. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't natural either. I stood there, squinting into the darkness, and then I saw someone. They were standing maybe 30 feet away in between some desert shrubs. They were wearing dark clothes, and they blended into the night, but I could see the shape of them clearly. Just standing there. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. I stepped forward once, then stopped myself. I didn't want to go any closer. I shouted out something about it being private property and calling the cops, trying to sound confident, though my voice shook. The figure stood there for a moment longer, then suddenly turned and walked away fast, disappearing into the brush. I didn't chase. I stood there until I couldn't see them anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. I locked all the doors, closed every blind, and kept the lights on. I stayed up in bed with my laptop, trying to distract myself with more Breaking Bad, but my mind was stuck on what I saw. I kept checking the windows every few minutes. No noises. Nothing else happened that night. The next day was my last full day there. I thought about leaving early, but part of me didn't want to lose the money. I also felt like maybe it was just some weirdo who got bored and wandered off. Still, I didn't go into the backyard again. I stayed indoors, kept the curtains shut, and did some more work on my laptop. That night, the last night, I was in bed around 10 p.m. Lights were off, except for the glow of the laptop. I was tired and wanted to sleep early for the long drive back. I was watching one last episode when I heard it again. A click, but this time it wasn't outside. It was close. Too close. It sounded like it came from the closet. I sat up slowly, heart racing. The closet door was open just a crack. The room was dark except for the laptop screen, but I stared at that gap in the door. I didn't move for a long moment. I listened. Nothing. Then another click. Same sound. Same place. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and ran out of the room, through the living room, and out the front door. I didn't even put on shoes. I got into my car, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway fast, stopping in the road to call 911. I explained everything to the dispatcher. I didn't know if someone was still inside, but I didn't want to find out. I waited out there in the car until a patrol car showed up maybe 15 minutes later. The officer walked through the house with me. We didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No unlocked doors. I packed all my stuff in a hurry and left that night. Found a last-minute hotel in town and stayed there. It cost more, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to be somewhere with other people. Later, I messaged the host and Airbnb. I told them everything. I only got a partial refund. The host said no one else had access, and they acted like I was overreacting. Maybe I was, but I still don't know who that person was or how they could have been in the house if the doors were locked and the windows weren't broken. I think about that closet sometimes, the way it clicked, like someone was in there trying to get my attention. I don't know if it was the host, someone who had a spare key, or just some stranger who got lucky. But I've never stayed in an Airbnb by myself again. I always go with someone now, and I always check every closet, every single one. We started the hike around 8 in the morning. The trail was part of a state forest in the Pacific Northwest, something we found online a few days before. The website said it was a 5-mile loop, easy to moderate difficulty, not too steep, with a lot of moss-covered rocks and pine trees. It sounded perfect. We were both used to weekend hikes, and this one didn't seem like anything special. just a relaxing day out. The parking lot of the trailhead was small, maybe room for 6 cars. Ours was the only one there when we arrived. I remember locking the doors, double-checking that I had my phone, battery pack, trail map, snacks, and water. My girlfriend tied her jacket around her waist and adjusted her pack straps, and we started walking. It was chilly that morning, and the trees were dripping from overnight rain. Everything smelled like wet bark and cold air. The forest felt empty, just birds in the canopy and the sound of our boots crunching over the gravel and pine needles. There was no wind. The first couple miles went fast. The trail was easy to follow, clearly marked with small wooden signs nailed into trees every so often, painted with white arrows. I remember we passed a small wooden footbridge, and about a mile later we climbed up onto a ridge that gave us a view of the tree canopy spreading out in every direction. It was beautiful. Everything was still damp, and the sun was breaking through the clouds in thin lines, making the moss glow a little. We didn't stop much, maybe just to drink water and take a few photos. My phone still had signal back then. I checked the GPS trail map app around 9:30, and everything looked fine. We were following the loop like it showed. We figured we'd be back to the car around 11, maybe 11:30. At some point around 10:30, the trail split. It wasn't on the map, or at least not in a way that made sense. One side dipped down through thicker trees, the other kept going straight. We picked the straight path because it looked more traveled. There were more boot prints in the mud. That's probably where we messed up. About half an hour later, we realized we hadn't seen a marker in a while. I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS again, but the app wouldn't load. No signal. I tried rebooting it while we kept walking, but nothing came back. My girlfriend said she didn't remember seeing a fork in the trail on the online map. I didn't either. We decided to keep going forward, thinking we'd eventually loop back. But we didn't. We kept walking. The terrain didn't change. More moss, more ferns, more of the same narrow trail bending through the trees. I started to notice the same types of fallen logs, split down the middle, with fungus growing up one side. The same forked tree with 2 trunks leaning away from each other. It all started to blend together. By noon, we should have been back at the car. Instead, we were still deep in the woods with no idea where the original loop had gone. I pulled out the paper map, but it was barely any help. It wasn't detailed, more like a brochure for tourists. It had a few landmarks, creeks, the footbridge we'd passed, the ridge, but no real topography. No alternate trails. No distances between markers. I could tell we were going in circles, though. That much was obvious. We started paying attention to landmarks. Every time we saw something that looked familiar, we'd stop and try to remember if it was the exact log we'd passed earlier. We started marking trees with sticks or stacking little piles of rocks next to the trail to see if we passed by the same places again. We did, but the weird part was that sometimes when we got back to where we'd made a mark, it was gone. Or at least, it didn't look like how we'd left it. That's when I started feeling uneasy. We stopped talking as much. We were both getting tired. We hadn't brought enough food for a full day, just granola bars and trail mix, and we were rationing our water. Around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, the trail sloped downward again, and that's when we saw the backpack. It was just lying next to a mossy log, half covered by ferns. Faded blue, with one strap torn off. I picked it up and checked inside. Most of the stuff was ruined. Everything was wet and smelled like mold. There was a granola bar still inside, but it was soft with rot and a crumpled receipt from a gas station. The date on it was October 2023. That was about 6 months before our hike. There was no phone, no wallet, just a backpack, alone in the dirt. I stood there holding it for a while, not sure what to do with it. Eventually I set it back down. I didn't want to carry it. It felt wrong. I didn't say much. My girlfriend didn't either. Her face had gone pale, and she looked like she was about to cry. I think that's when she started to really break down. She had been trying to stay calm, trying to treat it like a mistake, but something about the backpack made everything real. Someone else had been lost out here. The sun started going down. We hadn't seen another person the entire day. Not a single voice, no other hikers, no sounds of people in the distance. Just forest, just silence and the sound of our own breathing. Around 6 p.m., my girlfriend finally sat down and started crying. Not loud, just quietly, the kind where she didn't want me to see. Her face was dirty and scratched from some brush, and her jacket was soaked with sweat and mist. I sat next to her and didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The light through the trees was getting darker, softer, fading into shadows. Everything looked the same. No matter how far we walked, we couldn't find a way out. We kept walking anyway, even after it got dark. We turned on our phone flashlights, even though the batteries were already low. That's when we saw the tent. It was about 15 feet off the trail, tucked between some thick trees and under a leaning rock. At first, I thought it was just trash, something someone had left behind. But when we got closer, I saw that it was a tent, old and half collapsed, with holes in the sides. The fabric was torn and mildewed. Nearby, under the edge of a fallen tree, I saw what looked like bones. At first, I thought they were from a deer, but they were too long. The way they were shaped, the length of the femur, the curve of the ribs, they looked human. I didn't touch them. I didn't get too close. My girlfriend stood back on the trail, not moving, her flashlight shaking in her hand. I felt cold in my stomach, like something dropped straight through me. I told her not to go near it, and we left. We didn't talk about it. That night, we set up our emergency blanket a good distance from the trail, deep in the trees where we couldn't see the tent. We didn't light a fire. We didn't eat. We just curled up, our backs against a thick tree trunk, trying to stay warm. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something moving in the woods. Sometimes I thought it was just animals. Other times it sounded like footsteps, but I didn't move. I just waited for morning. When the sky started to brighten, we packed up fast and started walking again. We were stiff, hungry, sore. We followed the trail the same way we had the day before, not expecting anything. But after only 20 minutes, we saw a wooden sign up ahead, one of the original markers. It pointed to the parking lot. We followed it, and the car was right there. The sun had barely cleared the trees. It was 6:45 a.m. We got in the car and drove straight back to town. We didn't talk much on the drive, just silence and the sound of the tires on the wet road. I thought about reporting the tent and bones to someone, but I didn't even know exactly where we'd seen them. The whole area felt like a blur. I didn't know if I could even find it again. I told myself I'd go back one day and mark it properly, but I haven't. Every few months, I check missing hiker reports online. Usually I don't see anything that matches, but I still remember that receipt. I remember the date, the name of the gas station. One day, maybe I'll see a name that matches the area and the time. Maybe someone's brother or daughter or boyfriend went out there and never came back. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we hadn't found our way out that morning. If we'd walked in circles again. If we'd lost the flashlights, or if it had rained all night. I think about the bones, the tent, the backpack. None of it felt like a story. It just felt like something that happened. Something that could happen again. I was 12 when it happened. It still feels like it was yesterday, no matter how much time has passed. There are parts of that memory that stick to me like tar, and I don't think I'll ever be able to wash it off. I don't talk about it often. People get uncomfortable, but sometimes it feels like it needs to come out, like the truth gets too heavy to carry around all the time. When I was 10, I moved in with my dad. My parents split when I was younger, and I had been living with my mom until then. The move wasn't my idea. My mom said she needed time to get her life together, so I ended up in this small, quiet town with my dad. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't even really know my dad that well. He worked a lot, was tired most of the time, didn't really talk unless he had to. But he had some friends. One of them was a woman who lived a few blocks down, a single mom with 3 kids. He knew her from work or something like that. And I guess they had some sort of friendship where they looked out for each other. She had a daughter who was a couple years older than me. I'll call her Jess. Jess was 12 when I first met her. I was 10. We didn't become best friends or anything, but we saw each other enough that we got to know each other a little. Mostly we saw each other through mutual friends, kids in the neighborhood. The kind of friendships that just come from being close in age and living near each other. We never hung out alone. I think we both just didn't click that way, but we were always polite, friendly. Over the next couple of years, we ended up hanging out more often because we had the same friends. Jess was quiet but funny sometimes, a little more grown up than the rest of us, but still easy to be around. Her younger brother was a couple years younger than me, kind of annoying in a way little brothers usually are, but harmless. The last time I ever saw her, we were all at a group thing in someone's backyard. It was winter, close to Christmas, but not too cold. We were drinking hot chocolate and talking about what we hoped we'd get for Christmas. I remember she was excited about getting a new CD player. That was the kind of stuff we cared about back then. Stupid, normal kid stuff. I never imagined anything worse than getting grounded or losing my Game Boy. We had no idea that real evil could actually walk into your life without warning. I wasn't there that night. My friend Rob was. He told me what happened later, but even then, a lot of it was secondhand. I don't even think he really processed it when it happened. I don't know if he ever really has. That night, Rob was hanging out with Jess and her younger brother at their house. Their mom was at work. She worked a lot, took extra shifts when she could. Rob wasn't really supposed to be there, but we all bent the rules back then. He said he wasn't planning to stay long. It was just supposed to be a regular night. They were watching TV, probably playing video games. Around 9 or 10, someone knocked on the front door. Rob said Jess thought it was her mom because her mom always knocked a certain way when she came home. So she opened the door without thinking about it. Rob got scared because he knew he wasn't supposed to be there. So he panicked and jumped out the window and ran back to his house. He didn't think twice about it. Didn't see who it was. Didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. Just a mom coming home from work. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of a woman Jess's mom had been helping through her job. I don't know what kind of job it was, maybe something in social work or community outreach. All I knew was she had been working closely with this one woman for a few months, helping her with food stamps or housing or something like that. That woman had a sister who had recently been released from a mental institution. No one knew she'd found out where her sister lived, or that she'd figured out her schedule, or that she knew who else was in her life. She came in after Jess opened the door. Jess had no way of knowing who she was. No warning, no alarm bells. Just a woman her mom probably talked about, maybe even visited once or twice. I don't know all the details of what happened next, and I'm glad I don't. What I do know came from bits and pieces adults try to keep quiet, things I overheard, and a few things Rob told me when he got older. Jess's younger brother managed to escape through the back door while the woman was distracted. He ran barefoot through the snow to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door until they answered. They called the police right away, but it was too late. By the time they got there, Jess was already dead. They said the woman had brutally murdered her, decapitated her, left her body in the bathtub. She had taken her clothes off for some reason. It was such a sick, horrible thing to do, and no one could understand why. There was no logic to it, no motive anyone could make sense of, just madness and violence. The police had to search through the house to find her head. It wasn't in the bathroom. It wasn't with her body. They looked through drawers, closets. They even searched the wrapped Christmas presents under the tree. That part stuck with me the most. The idea of them tearing open those gifts one by one, not knowing if they were going to find something innocent or something horrific. They did find it, but no one ever said where. Some people said it was hidden in a box in her mom's closet. Others said it was under the sink. I don't know what's true. I just know they found it. And that's not something I ever wanted to imagine. After that, everything changed. No one talked much. My dad wouldn't let me walk anywhere alone. The neighborhood kids stopped hanging out like we used to. The whole street felt colder, quieter, like something had been sucked out of it. Jess's mom quit her job not long after. Moved away with her sons a few months later. I never saw them again. Rob didn't talk about that night for years. When he finally did, it was short, like the words were hard to get out. I remember he said he wished he hadn't run, that he felt like maybe he could have stopped it, but none of us blamed him. We were just kids. There was nothing he could have done. I wasn't allowed to go to Jess's funeral. My dad didn't think I could handle it. Maybe he couldn't handle it either. I remember sitting in my room that day, staring out the window while it snowed. It was quiet. I felt heavy, like I was filled with something sharp and cold that wouldn't go away. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there numb. It hit me later, weeks after, when I saw her name in the paper. That's when I started having nightmares. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking I heard a knock at the door. Even now, years later, I still flinch when someone knocks unexpectedly. I still check the locks twice before going to bed. Sometimes I think about Jess, about how she was just a kid, like the rest of us. She had plans. She had Christmas presents under the tree. She never saw it coming, and there was nothing fair about what happened to her. No reason, no closure that made it make sense. People like to believe that the world makes sense, that bad things only happen in scary movies or far-off cities. But I know better. I learned too young that sometimes evil wears a regular face. It doesn't knock like a monster. It knocks like a mother coming home from work. And you open the door. I left the parking lot just after sunrise. The trailhead was empty and the sky was clear. I remember checking the forecast 3 times the night before. No rain, no snow, nothing unusual. I had my pack loaded up with water, some jerky, a first aid kit, a flashlight, 2 extra layers, and a topographic map of the area. I wasn't planning on camping, just a long hike to clear my head. It was one of those remote trails in the Sierra foothills, steep, quiet, not popular at all. That was part of the reason I picked it. I wanted the silence. I didn't want to see anyone. The first few miles were easy, just dirt and dry leaves underfoot, tall pines on either side. A few birds here and there, nothing loud. It felt peaceful, and I liked how everything smelled like warm earth and pine sap. I walked for about an hour before I passed the old fire road. It was mostly overgrown, just a faint line cut through brush and rock, but I remembered seeing it on the map. It used to connect to an old fire lookout tower. That tower wasn't on modern maps anymore, but I'd read about it online. Something about it being shut down in the early 90s. Curiosity pulled me toward it. I figured I had the whole day, and I was prepared. The road climbed steeply. I had to watch my footing on loose rocks and old roots sticking up. The forest got denser as I went higher, thicker undergrowth, more fallen branches, and a strange silence that settled around me. Not the peaceful kind like earlier. This was heavier, not ominous, just quiet in a way that made you pay attention. I kept walking. Maybe another hour, maybe more. I lost track of time because there wasn't much else to focus on. I didn't check my phone. It barely had a signal at the trailhead, and by now I was sure it had none. The higher I got, the less sun came through the trees. The light was filtered, grayish cold. When I reached the tower, I almost missed it. It was hidden by trees, set back from the road. The thing was half collapsed, old steel frame rusting, the wooden platform above covered in fallen branches. The lower ladder had been pulled off or rotted away. I didn't try to climb it. I just walked around the base, listening. That was the strange part. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird in a while. No wind either. Everything was dead still. There was an old utility shack near the base of the tower, just a metal shed on concrete blocks. Its door was broken off, leaning against the side. Inside were empty shelves, rusted tools, broken glass. I didn't go in. I stood at the edge, looked in, then turned back to the trees. Something felt wrong. Not like danger exactly, just wrong in the kind of way that makes your stomach feel hollow. I figured it was time to head back, and I turned around. The trail looked different. That was the first moment I felt a real twinge of fear. I walked the same path out as I came in, but the road was harder to follow now. Overgrown spots looked even more closed in. Trees that I swore weren't there earlier now leaned in at odd angles. I shook it off as my imagination. Still, I picked up my pace. Maybe 10 minutes down the path, I saw something that stopped me cold, a pile of rocks. Not natural. Someone had stacked them, maybe knee-high, right in the middle of the trail. Balanced perfectly. They hadn't been there earlier, I was sure of it. I crouched down to look closer, checked the ground around it. No footprints, no animal tracks, just those rocks balanced and still. My chest tightened. I stepped around them and kept walking. The trail was fading, not just overgrown, fading like it had been wiped away. Bushes that I'd moved through earlier were now solid. Branches leaned into the space where the path should have been. It didn't make sense. I stopped, pulled out my map, checked my position. I should have been halfway back to the main trail by now, but nothing looked right. No landmarks, no ridges, no bends in the trail, I remembered. Just thick trees, rocks, and silence. I tried cutting through in the direction I thought was correct. I checked my compass. It pointed south, good enough. I figured if I kept heading south, I'd hit the main trail eventually. The brush was thick and unforgiving. Thorns tore my sleeves, and I had to duck under low branches. My legs were scratched up, and my arms stung from pushing through. I kept checking my compass. South. Still south. But the sun was wrong. It had been over my shoulder when I came in, and now it felt like it hadn't moved at all. Like time was stuck. I started to worry about the daylight. I hadn't packed a tent or a real sleeping bag. I had no cell signal, and I hadn't told anyone exactly which trail I was taking, just the general area. That was my mistake. I'd told myself it was fine. I didn't want anyone checking in. I hiked for another hour, maybe two. Still nothing. No trail. No tower. No sign of anyone. I started yelling. Not names, just sounds. Just to hear something. I got nothing back. Not even echoes. That silence felt like a wall. I started to feel watched. Not from any one direction. Just that sense of being seen without seeing. I kept moving. As the light started to drop, I found a clearing, small, just enough space to sit without brush. I forced myself to calm down. I ate some jerky, drank water, tried to think. I didn't want to panic. I knew the worst thing you can do when lost is keep moving blindly. So I stayed put, waited for the sun to move enough to help me reorient. It didn't move much, but the sky eventually dimmed enough to push me into action. I used the flashlight to move carefully. Every noise snapped my attention. Cracks in the underbrush, sudden rustles. I never saw anything, but I felt it, something out there, not just animals. I knew how animals moved. I'd spent enough time in the woods to tell a deer from something else. This wasn't a deer. It didn't make sense, but it wasn't. I finally saw something, a wooden post sticking out of the ground. An old trail marker. Faded paint on it, unreadable, but it was human. I moved toward it and found the path again. Not the same one I'd come in on, but a path. Real dirt path walked on. I followed it fast, almost running. I didn't care where it went. I just wanted out. It led to an old campsite. Fire ring. Logs. Trash. Signs of people. But nobody there. Looked abandoned, maybe days or weeks ago. I stayed the night there, huddled in my jacket, eyes wide open. Every sound snapped my nerves again, but nothing came close. By morning, I kept following the trail. Hours later, I found a service road. From there, it was just walking miles, but clear. Eventually, I heard engines. A dirt bike passed me, and I flagged the guy down. He looked surprised to see me, said I was way off any known trail. He pointed me toward a ranger station a few miles down. I never found that fire tower on any current map. I traced every satellite image I could afterward. Nothing. I don't know if it was removed or just forgotten. I reported the weirdness to the ranger. He didn't have much to say, just nodded, like he'd heard things like that before, but didn't want to talk. I think about that stacked pile of rocks a lot. I think about the trail vanishing behind me. I didn't hallucinate it. I wasn't dehydrated or sleep deprived. Something happened out there. Something I can't explain. Not ghosts. Not fantasy. Just something wrong, something off. I haven't hiked alone since. I don't know if I ever will. The house next to mine has been empty for as long as I can remember. It's the kind of place everyone in the neighborhood pretends not to notice. The previous owner, some older guy, left for California about 25 years ago, never came back, never sold it, and as far as I know, nobody's been inside since. The lawn's overgrown, windows caked with grime, siding peeled halfway off, and the mailbox still had the guy's last name, barely readable through the rust. No lights, no movement, nothing, just a decaying shell of the house that's always just been there. One night, I couldn't sleep. It was one of those restless nights where everything feels too quiet, too still. I kept looking out my bedroom window, staring at the place. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe boredom, maybe curiosity that finally caught up to me after all these years. I got out of bed, threw on some gloves, grabbed my flashlight, and headed outside. It was just after midnight, maybe 12:30. Cool air, no wind, just the sound of distant crickets and my own footsteps on the gravel. I walked up to the side of the house and tried the back door first. Locked, of course. So I went to one of the smaller windows near the back, pried at it a little, and surprisingly, it gave. The window groaned but slid open with a little force, and I climbed inside. The air hit me right away, stale, thick with mold and dust, and something else, something harder to place. Time, maybe. I landed on what felt like old carpet and flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, lighting up dust hanging in the air like fog. I didn't know where to start, but something pulled me toward the basement. I always pictured abandoned basements as the creepiest part of any house, so maybe I just wanted to get that out of the way first. I found the basement door near the kitchen and opened it slowly. It squealed on the hinges loud enough to make me freeze, just in case someone or something heard it. Of course, nothing did. I took a deep breath and started down the steps. The smell got stronger as I went down. Damp wood, rust, and that musty, time-frozen scent that old basements seemed to collect like a skin. The flashlight bounced off stone walls and old wood beams, catching cobwebs that looked like thin sheets of cloth. At the bottom of the stairs, the floor was cement, cracked in some places and covered in a thin layer of dust. But what got me wasn't the room itself, it was what was in it. First thing I noticed was the grand piano. It looked out of place down there, huge and heavy, the kind of thing you don't just move around. I walked up to it and pressed a key. The sound came out dull, low, and warbled. It still worked, but barely. Some keys were missing or jammed, and others sounded way off. The kind of music it would make now would send shivers down your spine, like the soundtrack to a nightmare. Next to it were boxes, some rotted out, others still intact. Inside, I found a bunch of World War II stuff. Old medals, uniforms, ration books, maps. One box had a gas mask and a folded American flag. It looked like someone had packed away someone's entire military history and just left it there. Sitting on a nearby shelf was a rolled-up poster in a plastic sleeve. I pulled it out and unrolled it. Elvis, young, black and white, smiling with his signature scrawled in the corner. If it was real, it had to be worth something. There were instruments everywhere. A violin missing strings, a trumpet with a dented bell, even an accordion that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Sheet music scattered on a bench, all yellowed and crumbling at the edges. Near the far wall was a broken picture frame. I picked it up carefully. The glass was cracked and the photo inside was a wedding picture. The man looked familiar in a vague, maybe I've seen him before kind of way. The woman had this distant smile, like she was smiling at something no one else could see. The frame had dust on it, but also something else, some kind of dried smear, brownish red. I didn't like that. After almost 30 minutes down there, I figured it was time to check the rest of the house. I climbed back up and pushed open the door to the main floor. My flashlight caught the edge of a counter, and immediately I saw old dishes still stacked beside the sink, long dried up food stuck to them like cement. The fridge door was slightly ajar, and the smell that poured out when I opened it made my stomach turn. Mold covered everything. Milk cartons puffed up and leaking. Takeout boxes turned to mush. On the stove, there were 2 pans, one with what looked like sausages, now fossilized, and another with something I couldn't even identify anymore. Half-empty beer bottles sat on the counter, some toppled over. I picked one up out of curiosity and tilted it. Nothing moved. Solid. Completely frozen in time. The labels were faded, the caps rusted. I moved through the living room, where an unmade bed sat right in the middle of it. Not a couch, a full-size bed with wrinkled sheets, a dent where someone had laid for a long time, and a pillow that looked like it had never been fluffed in years. On the nightstand next to it was a lamp still plugged in, the bulb faintly glowing. The power was still on. That detail set wrong with me. Why was the power still on in a house that had been abandoned for 2 decades? There were clothes thrown over a chair, and an old ashtray filled with cigarette butts. One of them still had a bit of filter left, as if someone had stubbed it out not too long ago. The house wasn't just abandoned. It felt paused, like someone walked out mid-life and never came back. I moved toward the staircase and started climbing. Each step creaked under my weight, the air feeling heavier with every foot I climbed. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until I hit the top. The hallway up there was narrow, lined with doors, 3 on the left, 1 at the end. I reached for the closest one, turned the knob, and pushed it open. A bathroom, everything covered in grime. A toothbrush still in the holder, a razor on the sink with rust on the blade. The mirror was fogged with time, stained in a way no amount of scrubbing would fix. I was about to move to the next door when I heard it. Crying. Not loud, not sharp, just soft, muffled, and low, like someone trying not to be heard. I froze. Every part of me locked in place. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I turned toward the room it came from, the second one on the left. I didn't open that door. I didn't knock. I didn't even breathe. I backed up, one foot behind the other, heart hammering, blood rushing in my ears louder than the sound itself. The crying didn't stop. It stayed steady. Same volume, same tone, just enough to let me know it was there. My legs finally turned back on and I ran. Down the steps, through the kitchen, back through the window, I came in, scraping my shin on the way out. I didn't stop until I was inside my house again, door locked, blinds down, hard in my throat. I never went back. I haven't told anyone about that night, because what am I supposed to say? That the house next door isn't as empty as we think? That someone, or something, was crying upstairs in a home nobody's lived in for 25 years? But there was no ghost, no glowing eyes or floating figures. Just sound, real enough to stop me in my tracks. A week later, I drove by the back of the house on my way to work and noticed something that hadn't been there before. The window I had opened had been shut. Not just shut, locked from the inside. I know because I tried it again the next night, just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. It wouldn't budge. Now when I walk past that house, I don't look at it. I don't wonder what else is in there. I don't ask why there was food still out, or why the lights worked, or who was crying. I just keep walking. Some things don't want to be found, and some places aren't abandoned. They're just waiting. I had been planning the hike for a while. It wasn't some big trip across a national park or anything, just a solo weekend hike through a lesser-known trail in the mountains a few hours from where I lived. I'd done a lot of hiking before, mostly on marked trails, but this time I wanted something quieter, more isolated. I wanted to feel like I was really out there in nature, away from everything. I packed enough food and water for 2 days, a light tent, a knife, a flashlight, extra batteries, a paper map of the area, a compass, a small first aid kit, and my phone. I checked the weather, told my coworker where I was going, and made sure everything was ready. I drove out early Saturday morning. The road leading to the trailhead was rough, mostly gravel, and by the time I parked, I was already deep in the woods. I didn't see any other cars. The air was cool, and the forest was thick with tall pine trees, the ground covered in dry needles and patches of moss. It felt peaceful. I followed the trail, which started clearly enough. It was narrow, but there were orange markers nailed into trees every 100 feet or so. Birds called from the branches overhead. I hiked for hours, climbing steadily upward. I passed a stream, crossed a log bridge, and found a small clearing around noon where I sat down to eat. I kept my map folded in my back pocket and checked it every now and then, but the trail seemed to match what I'd expected. At some point in the afternoon, I came to a fork. One path continued straight ahead and looked like the main trail, but there was another narrower one that curved off to the left. It wasn't marked, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd explore it for a bit and then come back. I stepped off the main trail and started walking down the smaller path. It felt less used, overgrown in places, and the trees were denser. I walked for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, expecting to find something interesting and overlook a waterfall, maybe even a hidden campsite. But nothing came. The trail started fading, almost like it hadn't been used in years. I turned around, but now the forest looked different. The sunlight had shifted, and every direction felt the same. I backtracked for a while, but I couldn't find the fork again. The trees all looked alike. I stopped and took a deep breath, told myself not to panic. I pulled out the map and tried to figure out where I'd gone off track, but the unmarked path wasn't on the map. I used the compass, but I realized I didn't actually know which way the main trail had gone after the fork. I'd lost my sense of direction. I tried retracing my steps the way I thought I'd come, but after another hour of walking, I knew I was completely off course. The ground was uneven now, sloping up and down, no clear path anywhere. The sun started dipping lower and the temperature dropped. I kept walking, hoping to stumble back onto a trail or find a landmark that matched the map. By early evening, I was exhausted. My legs were sore and I was starting to worry about running out of daylight. I found a small flat patch of ground near a boulder and decided to camp there. I set up my tent, ate a granola bar, and drank some water. I try not to think about the fact that I had no idea where I was. I didn't have any signal, and my phone battery was already low because I'd used it to check the GPS earlier, which hadn't helped much. I turned it off to save power. That night was rough. I could hear noises, branches cracking in the dark, leaves rustling, something moving far off. I told myself it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons. I didn't sleep much. The cold crept into my sleeping bag, and every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about how I'd gotten lost. I kept running through everything I'd done that day, trying to figure out where I'd messed up. The next morning, I packed up and started walking again, choosing a direction that seemed like it was going downhill, figuring it might lead to a stream or a road. I followed a dry creek bed for a while, hoping it might eventually connect to something, but it just wound deeper into the forest. I rationed my food and water, trying to keep calm, but every hour that passed made things feel worse. I knew I hadn't told many people where I was going, and even the person I had told wouldn't start worrying until Monday. No one was looking for me yet. My legs were scratched up from pushing through brambles and undergrowth, and my arms were covered in mosquito bites. The forest felt endless, just trees and trees in every direction. I found some edible berries, not many, but enough to stretch what little food I had. I boiled some water using a small stove I brought, but fuel was limited. I started drinking from streams, filtering it as best I could, but I knew that wasn't a long-term solution. By the third day, I felt the fear settle in. Not the kind that makes you scream or cry, but the slow, creeping dread that hangs over everything. I stopped checking the map because it didn't help anymore. It only made me realize how far off I probably was. My boots were soaked from walking through mud. My hands were cracked and dirty, and I hadn't eaten much in over a day. I moved slower, stopping more often to rest. That afternoon, I heard something. Not an animal, not wind, something mechanical. A dull thumping sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I stood still, holding my breath. Then I heard it again. It was a helicopter. I couldn't see it through the trees, but it was close. I ran toward the sound, uphill, stumbling, scraping my shins on rocks, branches slapping against my face. I made it to a ridge and saw it. A small rescue chopper hovering in the distance, just above the trees. I waved, shouted, anything to make myself seen. It didn't stop. It flew past, disappearing behind the trees. My chest sank. I almost dropped to my knees right there, but I knew I couldn't stop. They were searching. That meant someone had noticed I was missing. I pushed on, keeping toward where the helicopter had gone. Over the next few hours, I tried to stay in open areas, climbed up onto rocks, anything to stay visible. I heard the helicopter again in the distance. This time it sounded closer. I climbed another ridge and found a break in the trees where a large flat rock jutted out. I took off my jacket and waved it above my head. I don't know how long I stood there, 10, 15 minutes, but eventually I saw it coming back. This time it slowed, hovered, circled back. I waved with everything I had, arms flailing. A spotlight flicked on, sweeping across the trees and stopped on me. I almost collapsed. They lowered someone down on a cable, a rescue worker in a bright vest. He gave me water, asked if I was injured. I could barely answer. My voice was hoarse, and I was shivering. They pulled me up into the chopper, and I remember just sitting there, shaking, watching the forest fall away beneath me. At the ranger station, they gave me food, checked me out, asked what happened. I told them everything, where I'd started, how I'd gotten off trail, how long I'd been out. Apparently my co-worker had reported me missing Monday morning after I didn't show up to work. They launched a search that afternoon, and I was found Tuesday evening. I've been lost for nearly 3 full days. I lost about 10 pounds. I had mild dehydration, a couple of infected scrapes, and I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been. If I'd gone the other way, if I hadn't heard that helicopter, I don't know how long I would have lasted. I didn't sleep well for weeks afterward, kept waking up thinking I was still out there. I still hike now, but I stay on marked trails. I tell more people where I'm going. I bring a satellite GPS now, something with a beacon, and I never, ever walk down an unmarked path just to see where it goes. I learned that the hard way. Last New Year's, my two best friends and I decided to skip the loud parties and rent an Airbnb to have a quieter night together. We weren't into big crowds or wild drinking, but we still wanted to do something that felt a little different from our usual dorm rooms. It was just the three of us, me, Jason, and Christian, and the idea of having an entire house to ourselves for one night sounded perfect. Even if we didn't have much planned, just hanging out in a bigger space and relaxing sounded like the right way to start the new year. Jason was the one who found the place. It wasn't in the city or even in the suburbs. It was on the outskirts, closer to a rural area than anything else. From the pictures, it looked like a small, cozy cabin. It was all wood inside and out. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find on Airbnb, but it was one of the cheaper listings that still looked decent. It had enough room for all three of us and seemed private enough that we wouldn't have to worry about bothering anyone. That was important because even though we weren't going to throw a party, we still wanted to laugh, maybe play music, and not worry about paper-thin walls or neighbors. Christian and I carpooled there in the early afternoon, arriving just before noon. Jason had already gotten there, and we pulled up to see the cabin sitting in the middle of some trees, spaced out from the other, similar-looking cabins nearby. There weren't many, maybe 3 or 4 others we could see, and each one had a lot of space between them. It felt a little isolated, like being out in the woods, but not completely cut off. The driveway was gravel, and the cabin looked a bit older than it did in the pictures, but we weren't complaining. It had a front porch with 2 wooden rocking chairs and a couple of small windows. The trees around us were bare from winter, and snow was packed into the edges of the driveway and lawn. Inside, it was a little disappointing. It smelled like wood that had been sitting damp for years, and the furniture was mismatched and old. There were scuff marks on the wooden floor and a couple of stains on the carpet in the living room. Still, it had everything we needed: a couch, a TV, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms with a couple of beds and blankets. We spent the first few hours just hanging out, talking about random stuff, and eating the snacks we brought. The Wi-Fi barely worked, but Jason had his Switch, so we planned to play some games later. Around 6 in the evening, Christian said he was going to run to a store about 15 minutes away to grab some drinks and extra food. The sun had already gone down, and the temperature dropped fast. While Christian was gone, Jason and I stayed in the living room watching something on the TV. It was quiet outside, like dead silent. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at the front door. We both looked at each other, confused. We hadn't heard a car pull up, and we weren't expecting anyone. This place wasn't in a neighborhood, and it was New Year's Eve. It didn't make sense for anyone to be knocking on an Airbnb cabin out here. I got up and went to the door. There was a peephole, so I looked through it first. A man was standing there, probably in his 40s. He wasn't dressed for the cold, just a worn jacket and jeans, and he looked irritated, like he was already mad before I even opened the door. The door had one of those metal swing latches, so I slid it over and cracked it open just a bit to talk through the gap. He looked me dead in the eyes and told me, in this cold, pissed-off voice, that we needed to keep the noise down tonight and not disturb the whole area. It wasn't a suggestion or a friendly heads up. It sounded more like a warning. The way he said it rubbed me the wrong way, especially because we hadn't done anything loud at all. We hadn't played music or yelled or anything. I didn't say much back, just nodded, closed the door, and locked it. Then he banged on the door again. Not a knock this time. A hard, loud bang, like he was hitting it with his fist. I jumped a little from the sound, and Jason just stared at me like, what the hell is going on? I didn't open the door again. After a minute, it went quiet. We assumed he left, and when Christian came back about 10 minutes later, we told him what happened. He didn't even believe us at first, thought we were exaggerating. But we weren't. Something was off about that guy. The rest of the evening passed without anything weird happening. We made some food, watched a movie, and played a few rounds of Mario Kart. Midnight was getting close, and we were all still wide awake. It was nice, peaceful even. Then, right before midnight, we heard a loud clanging sound outside. It was sharp and metallic, like something heavy hitting the ground. We all looked at each other, startled. Then came the sound of glass shattering. I jumped off the couch and ran to the front window. Christian and Jason followed. Outside in the driveway was the same man from earlier. He was standing next to Christian's car, and the windshield was completely smashed. Glass was scattered everywhere, and in his hand was a metal baseball bat. He was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, and hitting the bat against the side of the car. The guy looked like he had completely lost it. Christian cursed and headed for the door. I tried to stop him, but he yanked it open and stepped outside. Jason and I followed quickly, but we didn't even make it out of the doorway when a gunshot went off. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring. I froze, heart slamming in my chest. Christian sprinted back inside, eyes wide with panic. He slammed the door and locked it. Another shot went off, hitting the side of the cabin. Then another, and then we heard the bat hit the front door over and over. He wasn't yelling or saying anything, just attacking. We got down low, behind the couch, and stayed there in silence. The front door rattled with each hit. We had no idea if he was going to break it down or if he was going to start shooting through the windows. Then suddenly the noise stopped. Just like that. No more gunshots. No more banging. We waited for what felt like forever before I got the courage to peek outside again. He was gone. We didn't sleep that night. None of us did. At first light, we packed our stuff and left. We called the police and filed a report. They came out later that day, checked the cabin, took statements, and looked around the property. The weirdest part was what they told us. That guy, he wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't a host. He didn't live anywhere nearby. They had no idea who he was. Nobody in the area recognized the description. He didn't have a car. No tracks, no tire marks, nothing. He just appeared, lost his mind, and vanished. The host of the Airbnb was just as surprised as we were. Said nothing like that had ever happened before. He refunded Jason and even apologized for something that wasn't his fault. We never got any answers. The police never found the guy. For weeks afterward, I kept checking news articles and local crime reports, trying to see if anyone else had encountered him or if he'd been arrested somewhere else. But there was nothing. It's been almost a year since that night, and I still think about it. About how random and dangerous it was. We were being loud. We didn't provoke anyone. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know if he had a mental breakdown or if he had some grudge against Airbnb guests or what, but the truth is that none of that matters. What matters is that we barely got out of there without someone dying. We don't do Airbnbs anymore. If we want to hang out, we do it somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. The memory of that guy's face, the way he looked at me through the cracked door, still sticks with me. The anger in his voice, the chaos in his actions, and how close we came to never making it back home. Four years ago, I rented an Airbnb for the holidays. I was visiting my family for Christmas, and instead of staying at someone's house and sleeping on a couch or taking up space, I thought it'd be better to just rent a place close by. I found a small single-story house that was only a few miles from my parents' place. It looked normal, kind of plain actually, nothing that stood out. A small front porch, a little driveway, and a garage attached to the side. The street looked quiet and safe. Neighbors had lights and decorations up for Christmas. It just looked like a regular middle-class neighborhood. It felt safe. I got there on December 20th, around 6 p.m. The sun had already gone down. The place was clean inside and looked exactly like it did in the pictures. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room. It had a decent TV, a couch that wasn't too worn, and a little dining area. Nothing fancy, but definitely good enough for a week. I didn't plan to do anything that first night. I just wanted to relax and get a good night's sleep after the drive. I had packed some leftover snacks and drinks, so I didn't have to go out. I turned on the TV, watched some mindless stuff for a bit, answered some emails, and laid in bed by 9:45 or so. It didn't take me long to fall asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up slowly. I wasn't fully alert, just drifting somewhere between awake and asleep. That's when I heard this noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like dull thumps, not loud, more like something hitting a wall a few times. The kind of sound that could be anything. I didn't feel scared or even nervous. I was still groggy and assumed it was the heating system or the house settling. Old places make noises, especially at night when everything's quiet. I probably stayed awake for a minute or two, then fell back asleep without even checking the time. By the time morning came, I had forgotten about it entirely. I texted my parents in the morning to let them know I was in town and we made plans for dinner that night. I spent most of that day just relaxing. I didn't leave the house. I watched some TV, scrolled through my phone, made a sandwich for what I'd brought, and just laid around doing nothing. It felt good, honestly. Around 5:30, I got ready and grabbed my things to head to my parents' house. When I opened the front door, I stopped immediately. A man was standing right there on the porch, directly in front of the door. He wasn't reaching for the door or knocking. He was just standing there. I hadn't heard him walk up, and the porch light was already on, which meant he must have been standing there quietly for at least a few seconds. We were face to face, just a couple feet apart. I was frozen for a second. It took a moment before I even reacted. He didn't say anything. He didn't make any movement. He just looked at me for a second, nodded once, then turned and walked away. He went down the short steps to the sidewalk and kept walking down the street like nothing happened. I just stood in the doorway watching him until he disappeared around the corner. That entire thing felt off. I couldn't make any sense of it. He didn't ring the bell or knock. He wasn't delivering anything. He didn't say a word. It was like he wasn't even surprised that someone opened the door like he expected it. I made sure the door was locked and everything else was shut up tight before I left for dinner. I couldn't stop thinking about it on the drive to my parents' house. When I got there, I told them about it, not in a panicked way, just like a weird little story. Everyone agreed it was strange. We all tried to laugh it off and chalk it up to some oddball walking around, maybe a guy who got the wrong house or something like that. We didn't let it ruin the night. The dinner was good, the house was warm, and we talked and caught up like we always do. Still, the entire time, I kept thinking about that man. I kept replaying it in my head. The way he stood there without knocking. The way he didn't say a thing. I started wondering if he had been watching the house before I opened the door. How long had he been standing there? Did he know I was staying there? Was he just waiting? I left my parents' place around 9 p.m. The drive back was quiet. It took about 15 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in my car for a second before getting out. I looked around, checking the porch, the sidewalk, the neighbors' yards. Everything looked calm. No one was out. The porch light was still on. Nothing looked touched or out of place. I walked to the door and unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it again behind me. I went straight down the hallway into the kitchen and dropped my keys and bag on the counter. That's when I heard it again. A thump. This time it was louder than the night before. It was more solid. It came from the same side of the house. I stopped moving. It wasn't a pipe or heating noise. It was something hitting a wall, a very real sound. I stood there, not breathing, waiting to hear it again. Then it happened again, louder this time, and it was right next to me. The sound came from a door in the hallway, one I hadn't opened yet. I hadn't used that part of the house. It was the door that led to the garage. I had no reason to go in there, so I hadn't bothered. I took a slow step toward it, and that's when I heard something that made my heart start pounding. Breathing. Heavy, human breathing. Someone was standing on the other side of that door, breathing heavily, only a couple feet from me. I didn't stop to investigate. I didn't yell or ask who it was. I turned, grabbed my keys off the counter, and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I got in my car, locked the doors, and backed out of the driveway while calling 911. I couldn't explain everything clearly. I just said someone was in the garage, and I had no idea how they got in. Police arrived maybe 10 minutes later. They told me to stay in my car while they went in. I sat there in the driveway, watching the front door and the side of the house, waiting for them to come back out. They were inside for a few minutes before two of them came out and told me what they found. The door I'd heard the breathing behind was the garage door. The lock on it was damaged. Whoever was in there had been trying to get into the main house. What I didn't know until that moment was that there was a side door leading from outside directly into the garage, one that had been left unlocked. It wasn't visible from the street, and I hadn't walked around the outside of the house at all during my stay. I had no idea it existed. The person must have come in through that door. By the time the police got there, the garage was empty. The person had slipped out. There were marks on the inside of the door, scratches and dents, like someone had been hitting or kicking it. They found footprints on the garage floor and a cigarette, but that hadn't been there earlier. Whoever it was had been in there recently. They were trying to get inside while I was there. That first night, those quiet thumps, that had been them. While I was sleeping upstairs, someone had been in the garage trying to break through that door. I left the Airbnb that night. I packed a few essentials and checked into a hotel. I didn't care about the cost or losing the rest of the booking. I didn't go back until it was time to check out, and even then, I only went with a friend in broad daylight to grab my things. I told the Airbnb host what happened and let them deal with the police report and everything else. I didn't want anything more to do with that house. To this day, I don't know who that person was. I don't know if it was the same man who was standing on the porch that first evening. I don't know if he had been watching me, waiting for me to leave, or if it was random. Maybe he'd been using the garage to sleep in for days, and I just didn't know. All I know is that someone was in that house while I was there. Someone was trying to get through that door into the main part of the house. I'll never forget that sound, the breathing, the thump of someone trying to force their way in while I stood just feet away on the other side. It wasn't a story. It was real. I was alone, and I was lucky. I haven't used Airbnb since. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating this guy she met on a dating site. I was happy for her at first. She had been single for a long time, and I figured she deserved some happiness. I didn't think much of it, especially since I had also met someone online not long before, my now wife. So I got it. Online dating wasn't weird to me, but from the very beginning, there was something off about the guy. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He wasn't the kind of person that sets off obvious red flags. If anything, he was too quiet, too still. He barely talked, and when he did, it was always something strange. I remember the first time he did something that really got under her skin. We were sitting in the living room with him, my mom, and my wife. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a little foil-wrapped chocolate, and held it out to my wife. She politely declined, but he just smiled, unwrapped it slowly, popped it in his mouth, then closed his eyes and moaned, long and low, as if it was the most amazing thing he had ever tasted. He didn't say a word after that, just sat there, slowly chewing, eyes still closed. My wife looked at me like, what the hell was that? I didn't know what to say. He hadn't done anything wrong, exactly, but it left both of us feeling uneasy. After that, little things kept adding up. Whenever we visited my mom's house and he was there, he'd never join us in conversation. Sometimes he would just disappear into the bedroom, close the door, and stay in there for hours. One time, we stayed over when my mom had to work a last-minute shift. Her boyfriend was already at the house when we got there. My mom said it was fine, so we let ourselves in and waited in the living room. He was there too, but instead of hanging out with us, he went straight in her bedroom and closed the door. No hello, no small talk, nothing. We didn't hear anything from him for the next 4 hours. Just silence behind that closed door. It was weird. I even thought about knocking, just to make sure everything was okay. But something about the way he was made me hesitate. My wife and I just sat there, trying to ignore it. As the months went by, my mom started to seem less happy. She didn't say much at first, just dropped hints that things weren't going great. He was quiet at home, didn't help around the house, didn't seem interested in her friends or family. Then, a few days before Christmas, she finally told us everything. My wife and I were visiting for the holidays, sitting around her kitchen table, and my mom just let it all out. She said he'd been distant, emotionally cold, and lately just gave her a bad feeling. She said she didn't trust him anymore. She said it was like he was always somewhere else in his head, and she couldn't tell where. We listened, gave her our honest thoughts, told her she deserved better. My wife was especially vocal. She'd never liked him from the start, and now she was glad my mom finally saw it too. My mom nodded along like she already knew. She had made up her mind. She said she was going to break up with him. On Christmas Eve, we stayed the night at her place, slept in the guest room, then got up early on Christmas morning to drive to my dad's house a couple hours away. He still lived in the town I grew up in. We weren't planning to stay overnight, but a big snowstorm came through unexpectedly, and the roads became impossible to drive on. We ended up getting snowed in. Honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was a cozy kind of snowed in. We made hot chocolate, played board games, watched movies. In a weird way, it was the nicest Christmas we'd had in a while. I didn't think much about what my mom might be going through at the time. I figured she had handled it kicked the guy out and was probably enjoying the peace. The next morning, the roads were finally clear enough to drive. We packed up and started the drive back. About halfway there, my wife turned to me and said she had a bad feeling. She said she couldn't stop thinking about my mom and the breakup. She didn't think the guy would have taken it well. Something about the timing, the weather, the isolation, it was all bugging her. She asked if we could swing by my mom's house on the way, just to make sure everything was okay. My mom lives in a small town a little outside the city. Her street doesn't get much snow, and she walks to work when the weather's decent. Her car was in the driveway when we got there. It didn't mean anything to me. She often left it there, even when she was gone. What had bugged me, though, was that the lights inside were off, and the house looked totally still. My mom has a habit of never locking her doors, which drives me crazy. We let ourselves in. Right away, something felt wrong. The air was cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been. The heating wasn't on. We stepped into the kitchen, and that's when we saw it. Blood. It was coming out of the fridge. More specifically, out of the water and ice dispenser built into the freezer door. Thick red liquid had pooled in the spilled tray and overflowed down the front of the door. It dripped slowly onto the floor, forming a dark, sticky puddle on the tile. My wife screamed, and I just stood there frozen. For a second, my brain wouldn't even accept what I was seeing. It didn't feel real. I felt my stomach turn and my chest tighten. All I could think was he killed her. He snapped when she broke up with him. He came back. She never locks her doors. He got in and killed her. And now, backslash. He put her in the fridge. Or maybe just her head. I walked forward, legs shaking. I didn't want to do it, but I had to know. I grabbed the freezer door handle, counted to 3 under my breath, and pulled. A cold fog rolled out as the door opened. I looked in, expecting to see something out of a nightmare, but all I saw was a bag of frozen cherries. It had been opened, sloppily, and then shoved into the freezer too close to the ice chute. The cherries had slowly melted, leaked their juice down into the dispenser, and because the bag was still leaning against the inside mechanism, it kept dripping, mixing with the ice, pushing it through the dispenser like it was a horror movie prop. I just stood there, staring at it, feeling like an idiot, but also completely drained. I could still hear my wife breathing hard behind me, trying to calm herself down. The smell hit me a moment later. Sweet, sour, sticky fruit. Not blood, not anything worse. I checked the rest of the house. My mom wasn't home. I called her and got no answer at first, but then a text came through 10 minutes later. She was fine. She had gone to stay with a friend for a few days after the breakup. Didn't want to be alone for the holiday. She said she was sorry she didn't tell us. She hadn't expected us to stop by. We left soon after. I cleaned up the mess, wiped down the dispenser, threw away the half-melted bag of cherries, and made sure the door was locked behind us. We didn't say much on the drive home. We were both too shaken. Even after I knew the truth, it stuck with me. That feeling, that fear. For just a minute, I had been absolutely sure that something terrible had happened. That I had walked into the aftermath of something unspeakable, and it had all been a bag of cherries. But that didn't change how that man had made us feel. And it didn't change the fact that, for a few hours, we had a glimpse of just how close the edge really feels. Even when it turns out there was never a drop of blood spilled at all.